So when I was 23, me and 11 friends drove up to this mountain lake for a party. One of my buddies, Josh, said he knew about this narrow little beach spot near the south end of the lake, past a rough gravel trail most people wouldn't take their cars down. We made it though, all 4 cars packed in like a bad game of Tetris. There was barely enough space to pitch 3 tents side by side, but it had a good view of the water and enough space for a fire pit, so we figured it was fine. By sundown, we had the fire going and music playing from a Bluetooth speaker one of the guys clipped to a tree branch. The beer was disappearing fast. Someone passed around a guitar. It was just that kind of night. Cheap fun, not much planning. Around 9:30, David Chen stood up and said we were running low on drinks. He offered to drive down to the gas station, which was maybe 15 minutes back down the mountain road. He had the cleanest car and hadn't touched any alcohol. Said he'd be back in 30 minutes, tops. It was close to 10:30 when his headlights finally came into view again. We were all halfway through telling a story about some weird swim instructor when his car pulled up. But as soon as he stepped out, the mood shifted. I can't say exactly what it was at first. Just something. He moved wrong. Like he was marching instead of walking. Straight legs, stiff arms. Like he had to think about each step. I remember someone laughing and saying, "Chen's been replaced with a robot." But no one else laughed. When he got close to the firelight, we saw he looked pale. Not sick pale, grayish. His lips were kind of chapped, and he kept licking them without noticing. Then he said something. I don't remember the words, because they didn't come out right. It was like static. Jumbled, half-formed sounds. He frowned and tried again. "It's cold," I think he meant to say, but it sounded more like "is code." We all looked at each other, and I swear it felt like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Someone asked if he was okay, if he'd had something to drink while he was gone. But he shook his head. He held up the case of beer, still unopened, and set it near the fire like everything was fine. But it wasn't. He didn't join the circle. He stood a few feet back and kept trying to talk. Random phrases, stuff that didn't make sense. One of the girls told him to sit down, take a breath, maybe eat something. But he just stood there, swaying slightly. At that point, I volunteered to grab more firewood. The flames were getting low, and I figured stepping away for a minute might help clear my head. I grabbed my phone, used the flashlight, and walked behind the tents into the trees. The forest back there was dense, thick pines, dry needles underfoot, no real trail. My light barely reached past 10 feet. After maybe 5 minutes of looking for dry wood, my foot caught on a root. I stumbled, and my phone flew out of my hand. It landed screen down somewhere ahead of me. The light flickered, then went out completely. I bent down, patting the ground with both hands, but all I felt were sticks and dirt. No phone. I stood up in the pitch black, trying not to panic. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was my phone light glowing dimly in the distance. A faint amber glow about 20 feet ahead. I moved slowly toward it, thinking maybe someone else was out here with a lantern or something. But it wasn't a single light. As I got closer, I realized there were 2 points, almost like eyes. 2 round, dull spots of light. Not moving, not blinking, just hovering there in the dark. They weren't headlights. They were too low to the ground, too close together, and they weren't reflecting. They were emitting, like the glow you see from the ember of a cigarette. I stopped walking. I crouched slightly and listened. Total silence. No wind, no crackling fire, no voices from the beach. Just my own breath, louder than I wanted it to be. Then one of the lights shifted slightly to the left. Just a few inches. Not a lot, but enough. They weren't just lights. They were watching me. I backed up one step, then another. I reached into my jacket pocket for my lighter, the only other light source I had. I flicked it once. Flame. In that flash of light, I saw tree trunks all around me and something squat and motionless sitting low to the ground ahead. But the flame blew out almost instantly. The breeze came from behind me. I hadn't felt any wind a second ago. I didn't turn around. I crouched again, felt around for a rock, a stick, anything. My fingers brushed against something cold and wet, probably a mossy log, but I grabbed it anyway. Then the amber lights blinked out, both at once, gone, just like that. I didn't wait. I turned and walked fast, too fast, back toward the beach, trying not to trip. My eyes had adjusted just enough to make out vague shapes. I made it through the brush, past the tents, and back to the fire. My friends were all standing now, grouped up and looking in my direction. David was gone. The case of beer still sat next to the fire, unopened. But he wasn't anywhere in sight. I realized I was looking at eyes reflecting some unseen light source. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or raccoon, but something about the angle didn't make sense. I yelled, loud and sharp, just to scare it off. "Hey!" I shouted. Nothing. The glowing eyes stayed fixed, unblinking. I picked up a rock and hurled it toward the shape, but even after it crashed through the brush, the eyes didn't flinch. Then they started rising, slowly, lifting higher off the ground like something was standing up. From where I stood, it had to be at least 7 feet tall now, towering over the undergrowth. My legs moved before I could think. I turned and ran, crashing through branches, slipping on pine needles, scraping my hand on a tree trunk. I didn't stop until I saw the flicker of firelight through the trees. When I got back to the campsite, everyone looked relaxed again. Someone was passing around a bag of chips. The guitar was back out. David was sitting near the fire. He looked up as I stepped into the light. "You good?" he asked, voice slower than usual but clearer than before. I nodded, too winded to speak. I glanced around, counting faces. All 11 of my friends were accounted for. David looked normal, but there was still something wrong. He laughed at a joke a few seconds too late, and it came out flat, like he'd memorized the sound of laughing, but didn't know what it meant. His eyes didn't blink much, and every time someone spoke, he stared at them a few seconds longer than was natural, like he was studying them. People noticed. You could feel the awkward energy when he tried to chime in. Eventually we packed up. The mood had shifted. Nobody said anything, but we all wanted to leave. It felt wrong to sleep there. David hugged everyone goodbye when we reached the cars. His arms went around me, but there was no pressure, no warmth. Just stiff, slow movement. When I stepped back, he smiled at me. Too wide, too even. I didn't say anything on the drive down the mountain. Nobody did. David called me 2 days later. I answered immediately. "Hello?" No reply. Just breathing on the other end. Not heavy or panicked, just slow and deliberate, like someone practicing how to breathe normally. "David?" I said. Still nothing. Then, a noise. A broken attempt at a word. Something like, "Hal," and then it cut off. I got another call the next evening. Same number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. This time the voice was closer to real speech. "Hey." The rhythm was wrong, the pauses in the wrong places, like someone imitating speech from memory. I hung up. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I got a message from one of our friends. David's neighbor had called his sister. Around 3 in the morning, the neighbor saw David crawling out from under his car in the garage, hands and feet dragging across the floor. The neighbor thought he was fixing something, but then David stood up and walked into the woods behind the house. His car keys were still in the ignition. His phone and wallet were on the counter. He wasn't packed for a trip, and nobody's seen him since. It's been 3 weeks. The police treat it like a normal missing person case. They told his family he might be dealing with a mental health issue, maybe a breakdown. Maybe he got lost in the woods. They did a search. Nothing turned up. No clothes, no footprints, no trail. But I know that thing wasn't David. Whatever walked back into our campsite only looked like him. It was learning how to move, how to sound, how to blend in. The calls were practice, getting better every day. That second call, the way it said hey, it was almost perfect. I think about him a lot, about the real David, whether he's still out there, whether he's even alive, or if whatever I saw that night, the thing with the glowing eyes, killed him and took his shape. I don't tell anyone this. They wouldn't believe it. But I haven't gone camping since. Not in forests. Not where the trees pack in close and the light disappears after dark. I keep my doors locked, my curtains closed at night, and I always keep my phone charged. When I was 17, I worked part-time at my uncle's small engine repair shop. I'd go straight there after football practice, still in my sweaty shirt half the time. It was mostly lawnmowers, weed whackers, a couple of old ATVs. Nothing fancy. My uncle paid me in cash, enough to keep gas in my car and food in my stomach. I didn't mind it. The work was straightforward, just sorting parts, cleaning up, changing spark plugs. Sometimes I'd hum to myself while I was digging through drawers looking for the right bolt or messing with old machines. The shop sat on the edge of an industrial strip just off the highway, with this abandoned warehouse right across the street. It had been empty for years. You could tell just by the busted windows and the faded signs still clinging to the bricks. Vines had started creeping up one side, and pallets were stacked haphazardly near a caved-in loading dock. I never thought much about it. No one ever went near it. There wasn't any reason to. Then, in my second week on the job, I was organizing a bin of old spark plugs when I heard someone whistling. At first, I thought it was coming from outside, maybe someone walking by. But when I stopped to listen, it kept going, and I realized it was the same tune I'd just been humming. One of those top 40 songs you couldn't get away from, I forget which. I poked my head out the back door, but the alley was empty. When I walked around to the front, that's when I realized the whistling was coming from the warehouse across the street. It was faint, but there was no mistaking it. Someone over there was repeating the melody, a few beats behind me, like an echo with a delay. I didn't see anyone. Just the shattered windows and weeds. It gave me a weird feeling, but I told myself it was probably just some homeless guy hanging out inside, copying what he heard. People camped out in places like that all the time. Maybe he was just bored. I figured if he wanted to mimic the dumb stuff I sang while working, let him. I didn't tell my uncle. It didn't seem worth it. But the next couple of days, it kept happening. I'd hum without even thinking about it, some chorus stuck in my head from the radio, and like clockwork, I'd hear that same tune echoed back from the warehouse. Always off, like someone who didn't really know the lyrics. The voice was off too, raspy and slow at first, like someone drunk or groggy. Then, day by day, it got sharper, closer to my pitch, timing, even the way I dragged out certain notes. Then one afternoon, I dropped a wrench and swore out loud. Shit. Just under my breath. A second later, that same word came back at me from across the street, drawn out and weird. Shh. Eat. I stood still, looked out the front window. Nothing moved over there. A couple cars zipped past on the road, but the building sat quiet. I picked up the wrench and tried to forget about it. Next day, same thing happened again, only this time it sounded clearer. I knocked something off the counter, can't remember what, and grumbled, "Damn it." And I swear to God, maybe 2 seconds later, that same phrase came from the warehouse. "Damn it." Same inflection. Like someone mocking me with perfect timing. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was deliberate. I started checking the building more carefully after that. I'd stand at the shop window and stare across the street. Nothing ever moved. I didn't tell anyone because I wasn't even sure what I'd say. The idea of some guy living in there and repeating everything I said out loud? It sounded dumb. By the end of that week, I couldn't take it anymore. Curiosity or nerves, I don't know. But I had to look. I waited until my uncle left early that Friday to make a parts run. The minute his truck pulled out, I locked the front of the shop and crossed the street. The warehouse had a chain-link fence around it, but it was rusty and bent. I found a spot near the back where the metal had been peeled up, probably years ago. I ducked under and stood there for a second, taking in the place up close. The air smelled like old dirt and something sour, like wet carpet or animal piss. The loading dock was warped and crumbling. A forklift sat half sunk into the pavement on flat tires. One of the garage doors had a gaping hole where the panel had been kicked in. I climbed up and peeked inside. It was darker than I expected. Sunlight only made it a few feet past the opening. I could see broken glass and what looked like old office chairs piled up. Beer cans, graffiti, a mattress in one corner. Typical squat stuff. But I didn't see anyone. "Hello?" I called, just to test. Silence. Then, "Hello?" came back from somewhere deeper in the warehouse. My voice, my exact tone. It wasn't loud, but it hit me hard. I stepped back and looked around again. Still nothing moving. I decided to go in. The concrete floor was cracked in spots and littered with trash. My boots crunched glass with every step. I walked along the wall, careful not to slip. There were some old filing cabinets near the middle of the room and what looked like a bunch of scrap wood. I didn't go too far. Maybe 30 feet in. The air got colder. Still, no one in sight. Then, I heard a sound to my left. A soft shuffling, like someone dragging a foot or shifting their weight on gravel. I turned fast, but there was nothing there. Just shadows. I took one step back, then another. Behind me, from deeper in the warehouse, I heard the phrase again. "Damn it." This time louder, clearer. I turned and walked fast toward the opening. Didn't run, but didn't stop to check anything else either. I ducked back through the gap in the fence and crossed the street without looking. Back in the shop, I closed the front door and locked it. Just stood there for a while, listening. But everything was quiet again. I climbed the concrete steps one at a time, careful not to slip on the moss that had grown over the edges. The metal handrail was rusted through in places, flaking red-brown under my palm. As I reached the top, that stench hit me full force. Piss, mildew, and something else. Something warm and sharp like an animal that had been living in filth. It made me gag. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve, but it didn't help. My nose started running. Then, from just inside the shadowed entrance, I heard it again. My own voice, perfectly repeated. The exact curse word I'd said earlier in the day. Same inflection, same clipped tone. Like it had been recorded and played back with my lungs. I hesitated just outside the threshold, then raised my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark like a knife. The floor was scattered with metal scraps, broken crates, and tangled wires. In the center of the entryway, crouched on all fours, was something pale. The light caught its face. The skin was stretched thin, blotchy, with patches of grime and hair clinging to it. The neck was impossibly long and tilted back like it had no bones in it at all. Its eyes were huge and round, and when the light hit them, they reflected bright amber like a cat's in headlights. It didn't move at first. It just stared at me. Then it started to twist its neck, slow and silent, until its head was upside down. Its eyes never blinked. I heard it inhale like it was trying to taste the air. Then, in my exact voice, it repeated the word again. Not close. Exact. Right down to the throatiness. Like it was playing a clip recorded straight from my own mouth. I stood there frozen. Not scared like a horror movie, more like my legs just gave up. I couldn't even blink. My heart started pounding so loud I could feel it in my teeth. Then I heard its limbs shift. That slow scrape of something dragging across concrete. That snapped me out of it. I backed away, nearly tripped, then turned and bolted down the steps. I didn't hear footsteps, but I did hear movement. Heavy and clumsy, scraping metal and plastic tumbling behind me. I didn't stop. I didn't even think. I went straight for the gap in the fence, ducked under, scratched my elbow on the chain link, and ran across the street. My uncle's shop was still empty. I got inside and locked the door. Then I backed up until I hit the tool cabinet. I stayed there for a minute, just breathing, waiting to hear the door rattle or glass break. Nothing happened. I pulled out my phone and called my dad. Told him I wasn't feeling good, that I needed to go home early. I didn't give details, just said I felt sick. When my uncle came back, I told him the same thing. He didn't argue. Said I probably caught a bug going around and told me to rest up. I didn't rest. I stayed up half the night staring at the ceiling in my room, thinking about that voice, that face. I kept wondering what would have happened if I'd gone inside, if I'd said more, if it would have said more back. I didn't tell anyone. Not my dad, not my uncle, not my friends. What could I even say? That something in an abandoned building was copying me like a parrot with my voice? I didn't need people looking at me like I was losing it. I just kept going to work. Same routine. But from that day forward, I never hummed again. Not even quietly. Not even out of habit. I didn't sing. Didn't talk to myself. Didn't whistle. I didn't drop tools loudly either. I made everything quiet. And it stopped. No more echoes from across the street. No more mimicry. No more feeling watched from those broken warehouse windows. I still glanced that way, almost every day. I couldn't help it. But it was always still. Just empty glass and peeling brick. Like it was before. The warehouse sat like that for a few more months. Then one day a crew came in. Bulldozers, portable fences, big dumpsters. They tore it down piece by piece. I watched from the front bay of the shop, pretending I was wiping grease off my hands. Took them about 2 weeks to finish. Then it was just a gravel lot for a while. 6 months later, they built a strip plaza over it. Pharmacy, coffee shop, 2 empty units. I still avoid it. Even now, years later, I don't go near that plaza. I drive the long way around. I won't even get gas at the corner station next to it. I know it's dumb. I know whatever was there is gone. Or maybe it isn't. I think about that thing sometimes, crouched in the dark, waiting for a sound. I wonder if it was still there when the demolition crew came through. I wonder if it escaped. If it found a new place with echoes, new people to mimic. I still don't speak much when I'm alone. I don't like hearing my voice bounced back to me. Not anymore. In summer 2018, I decided to check out an abandoned trail a friend of mine had mentioned the year before. He used to live on the outskirts of Las Vegas and said there was this old mining road that twisted through the mountains, mostly forgotten, not on GPS or any marked maps. He called it the Basin Cut, but said only older locals even knew it existed. I couldn't find anything online about it, but I like remote places, especially ones that aren't overrun with other hikers. So I asked around and ended up finding someone near Henderson who gave me a rough idea of where to look. They warned me there wouldn't be any cell service once I hit the rocks, and that the trail itself was hard to follow unless I knew what I was doing. I brought a power bank, 2 extra water bottles, and a paper map with the rough area circled. I started hiking early, around 6:45 a.m., while it was still relatively cool and the sun hadn't fully cleared the ridge. The land was dry and flat at first, nothing but sharp gravel and low cactus patches, but it slowly tilted upward toward a rockier incline. About an hour into the hike, I stopped for a drink and heard a low, drawn-out howl coming from up the canyon wall. I'd heard coyotes before, and this was definitely close to that, but it had a weird rhythm to it. Not frantic or panicked, more like a slow wail, followed by total silence. I waited, but nothing else followed. I chalked it up to an animal giving some warning signal and kept going. The sun was up by then, and it was already pushing into the mid-90s. The trail was barely visible in parts. It weaved between scattered rock piles and thorny brush that pulled at my pants. Every 30 or 40 minutes, I'd hear the howl again. The second time it was clearer, definitely higher up on the ridge. The third time, I could almost tell where it came from, just above the ledge line where the canyon curved west. The weird thing was, I never saw the animal making the noise. I kept stopping to scan the hills, expecting to catch movement, a tail or ears poking above a rock. But nothing. No other sounds either. No birds, no rustling. I hadn't seen another person since I'd left the highway miles behind. It should have been unsettling, but I kept telling myself it was just a lone coyote, maybe injured, doing what animals do. There wasn't much shade left the deeper I went, and I had to ration sips of water. The terrain changed again about 2 hours in. The canyon narrowed into a tight corridor with high sides. The wind dropped off and the air got still, and in the middle of this narrow cut was a shallow ravine that broke off to the right. I followed it maybe 100 feet down and saw something strange at the base of the slope. It looked like someone had stacked dry branches and large flat rocks into a kind of shelter. The thing was wedged into a curve in the canyon wall, almost hidden from view unless you came at it from the side. It wasn't a natural pile. There were signs of deliberate placement. Smaller sticks woven into lattice shapes and rocks that had clearly been carried from nearby. Inside the structure was a partial tarp, sun-bleached and brittle. Looked like someone had tried to camp there but hadn't been back in a while. The ground around it had boot prints. At least, I thought they were boot prints. One of them looked a little too deep for how dry the soil was, like whoever made it had been carrying weight. I took a couple of pictures with my phone and kept moving. I didn't like the way the place felt. Too quiet and stale. The canyon bent again just past the shelter, and that's when I heard the howl for the 4th time. But this time, it wasn't from above me. It came from directly behind. I froze and turned around. At the top of the ravine slope, maybe 20 feet back, stood a coyote. But it wasn't like any coyote I'd seen before. This one was big, easily twice the size of a normal desert coyote. Its coat was patchy and dusty, and it had this weird stiff posture, head level, not lowered in a defensive way. It didn't move or flinch, just stood there staring at me with its mouth slightly open. No panting, no tail twitching. I'd never seen an animal stand that still for that long. I didn't have a weapon, just a hiking stick. I raised it a little without pointing it directly at the animal, but it didn't react. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on it. It didn't follow, just kept staring. I moved around the next bend and picked up my pace. The trail widened again and led up onto a ridge that gave me a view of the entire basin. I stopped to catch my breath and looked back. The ravine was partially hidden by brush, but I could still see the slope where I'd come from. The coyote was gone. There weren't any sounds, no footsteps, no scuffling on the rocks, just heat and silence. I stood there for a few minutes waiting to see if it would appear again. It didn't. I checked my phone. No signal. I decided not to go any farther. The trail was supposed to keep climbing toward an old mine shaft another 2 miles in, but I wasn't comfortable continuing with whatever that animal was. I turned around and started back, keeping my ears open and my pace steady. I didn't see or hear the coyote again, but I kept catching the faint scent of something, like sun-baked animal hide or old blood. Every time the breeze shifted, it came back. By the time I reached the entrance of the canyon again, the sun was high, and I was nearly out of water. I kept checking over my shoulder the whole walk back. The oversized coyote slowly opened its mouth and let out the same long, haunting howl I'd been hearing all morning. This time, standing just 20 feet from me, the sound felt completely different. It wasn't just eerie, it vibrated in my chest. Too deep for a desert coyote, more like something you'd expect from a full-grown wolf, but lower still, and drawn out so unnaturally long that it seemed to stretch the moment around it. The sound didn't echo. It held still in the air, like it was meant for me alone. The coyote's eyes never left mine, not even while it howled. That's what made it feel wrong. Wild animals don't make eye contact like that, not while vocalizing. It finished the howl and then stayed completely still looking straight at me. 10 seconds passed. Then it shifted one front paw forward and stepped closer to the edge, just enough to let me know it was real and that it was watching me on purpose. I realized then it hadn't just found me by accident. That coyote had been following me from the start, shadowing me along the canyon rim, matching my pace every step of the way. Every time I stopped and heard that distant howl, it had been positioning itself, keeping me within its view without being seen. All morning, it had tracked me across dry creek beds and up ridge lines, and I never saw it until I entered that ravine. It had waited until then to reveal itself. I tightened my grip on the hiking stick and took a half step back, testing the loose rocks beneath my boots. It didn't move. I didn't know if it was trying to scare me off or bait me into reacting. The heat of the canyon suddenly felt heavier, like I was standing in the middle of something I didn't understand, something not meant for me. My breathing was shallow, and I realized I had no idea how close I was to collapsing from heat or dehydration. The coyote tilted its head slightly, just enough to show it was still reading me. That broke whatever spell I'd been under. I turned and ran. The trail narrowed quickly, and I had to watch every step to keep from falling. My boots slid over small rocks that broke loose and tumbled ahead of me. Cactus thorns scraped against my legs, and at one point I lost my footing completely and dropped to my hands, scraping both palms open on the gravel. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. That same deep howl rang out behind me again, but now it was different. It echoed in the canyon walls, bouncing from side to side, like it wasn't coming from one spot anymore. It seemed to move with me, shifting position every few seconds. It was always behind me, but never in the same place twice. I pushed harder, not caring about the cuts or how badly my thighs were burning. I knew the trail well enough to guess how far the parking area was, and if I could just keep my footing through the last dry wash, I could make it. I slipped again, climbing out of the creek bed, catching myself with my elbows before stumbling forward into open sun. That's when the howling finally stopped. Just cut off in mid-tone, no tapering, no fade out. Just gone. I didn't slow down. I kept moving until the ground leveled out, and I saw the shimmer of my car through the heat haze. By the time I reached the vehicle, my mouth was dry and my shirt soaked through. I unlocked the door, climbed in, and just sat there with the engine off, windows down, waiting to hear another sound. Anything. But the air was dead still. The parking lot was empty. No footprints, no tire tracks besides mine. I waited another minute, then started the car and drove straight back to my apartment, not stopping even to refill my water. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I looked up articles and research papers about large coyotes, coyote-wolf hybrids, anything that could explain the animal's size. Some results mentioned crossbreeding with domestic dogs creating slightly larger specimens, but nothing matched what I'd seen. That animal was massive, easily 80 pounds or more, and didn't look mixed. Its coat, its ears, even its frame. Everything looked pure desert coyote, just oversized and too calm. Over the next few weeks, I kept digging. Somewhere on a forum, buried in an old thread about desert myths, I found someone talking about the Spring Mountains region, where I had hiked. They mentioned stories passed down by local tribes, ones not often written down, about beings that could shift between animal and human form. Not ghosts, not demons, something else. They had names for them in their language, but the rough translation was always similar: watchers, mimics, or guardians of certain lands. The stories weren't dramatic or spooky. They were warnings. Simple advice like, don't walk alone past the basin, or don't answer when it howls. I can't say I believe in legends, but some details stuck with me. The eye contact, the howling only when I was vulnerable, the tracking behavior. All of it felt planned, not instinctual. That animal hadn't wanted to hurt me, but it wanted me to know it was there. It wanted me to see it, to run, to leave, and never come back. And I didn't. I've never gone near that trail again. I deleted the GPS pin, burned the map I drew, the photos I took of the shelter. I found them gone from my phone a week later. Maybe I deleted them by accident, or maybe I didn't. Either way, I haven't looked for them since. I hike elsewhere now. Safer places. Places with signs and maps and cell signal. And if I ever hear a howl while walking alone, I don't stop. I turn around and go home. Every time. When I was 26, I was testing out a set of new tactical gear in the mountains of West Virginia. I'd gotten a hold of a military-grade vest and respirator from a buddy who worked private defense contracts, and I wanted to get a real-world feel for how they'd hold up. I'd taken a few days off work, loaded up my gear, and drove out past Elkins into the Monongahela backcountry, where I knew I could train without anyone around. The plan was to do some hiking in full loadout, simulate exhaustion drills, and run some live fire testing at a dried-out ravine I'd scoped years back. It was around noon when I got to the spot. Deep cut, 40 feet down. Old riverbed dried out to nothing but hard-packed clay and rock. I parked my SUV about 300 meters off and hoofed the rest of the way in. The first 20 minutes were uneventful. Just me pacing out distances, testing reload speed, doing burpees with a 25 lb ruck strapped to my chest. Then I got hit by a smell that nearly knocked me on my ass. It was thick, sharp, and warm, like rotting eggs smashed together with wet fur and swamp water. I've spent time around animal carcasses before. This was different. I gagged hard, eyes tearing up under the clear lenses of my goggles. I couldn't pinpoint the direction, but it was close, and it was moving with the breeze. I pulled my respirator from its pouch, fitted it tight, and took a few slow breaths. It helped. Not completely, but enough. I was about to go back to my routine when I heard it. Something scraping rock followed by a low, pulsing growl. It came from above, up along the rim of the ravine. It was long, deliberate, like something pacing just out of sight. I froze and listened, the way I was trained to do. Another scrape, slower this time. Then the growl again. My thoughts jumped straight to the local rumors. Stories people told over beers about government labs and mountain-bred monsters. Big blacks, they called them. Supposed black bear hybrids released in the 70s for experimental testing, whatever that means. Most likely garbage, I figured, but it didn't stop me from unclipping my sidearm and flipping off the safety. I stepped backward into deeper cover and listened again. The noise stopped for maybe 10 seconds. Then I heard something sniffing. Not short huffs like a deer. Deep, wide pulls of air. My location wasn't windward. Whatever it was close and working to find me. I stayed crouched, still breathing through the mask, pistol drawn, trigger resting but not slack. I could just make out a dark movement above, between two big pines. That was enough. I backed up further along the base of the ravine, eyes fixed on the tree line above. I didn't want to shoot unless I had to. Could be a bear. Could be a dog. Could be some nutcase off his meds living out in the hills. I've seen weirder. I needed a visual. I moved quietly along the ravine's edge, found a notch with decent handholds, and started climbing. The vest weighed me down more than expected. My palms were slick inside the gloves, and it took longer than I liked. When I pulled myself up onto level ground, the smell hit again. Stronger, more concentrated. And that's when I saw it. It stood about 50 yards off, its back to me, moving through a cluster of fallen logs. It looked like some twisted mixture of species, like nature got the blueprint scrambled. Its body had the mass and gait of a gorilla, low to the ground, powerful in the shoulders. But the head, the snout, it was elongated, almost like a boar or maybe a rhinoceros, with thick cartilage and wide nostrils. Its fur was clumped and matted, gray-brown and dirty, hanging in wet ropes off its back. The forearms were massive, and each paw was easily the size of a car tire, 5 thick digits ending in black claws. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Every instinct I had said to back off, slowly, quietly. I eased one foot behind the other, heel first, keeping my eyes on the thing. I made it 3 steps before I stepped on a dry branch. The crack echoed like a gunshot. The creature stopped dead. One leg mid-step, head still lowered. For a second I thought maybe it hadn't heard. Then it turned. Slowly, deliberate. And I saw the face. The eyes were small and black, set far back in the skull. The snout twitched once, Then again. Its lip curled, not like a snarl, more like confusion. It took a step forward. I didn't wait. I dropped into a crouch and moved fast back toward the slope. It let out a deep chuffing sound. Not a roar, not a bark, but something in between, and started moving toward me with a thudding, deliberate gait. I cleared the slope and slid halfway down on one hip, twisting my ankle in the process. I reached bottom and turned, weapon raised, heart hammering. But it didn't follow. Not yet. Just stood there, silhouetted at the top of the ridge, looking down at me with that long jaw half open, breathing heavy, watching. The creature immediately turned toward the sound and looked directly at me. It rose up on its hind legs, reaching nearly 14 feet in height when fully upright. Its chest expanded with a slow inhale, and then it made a sound I'll never forget. Deep, guttural, a kind of hruff that vibrated through the air like a subwoofer. I fired one shot center mass without thinking. The round punched through the air and struck, but it barely phased the thing. The fur on its chest was so thick, so tightly matted with grime and mud, that the bullet just tore a shallow gash across the top layer without making it to flesh. I adjusted my stance, dropped into a proper crouch, and aimed straight for the head. The second shot hit dead on, just above its left eye. I expected blood. Instead, the round deflected with a high-pitched metallic ping, like I'd fired at steel. The recoil snapped back through my wrist, and I stumbled 2 steps backward, shocked. This thing's skull, whatever species it belonged to, was dense enough to shrug off a point-blank shot. It blinked once. Not fear, not pain, just processing. Then it moved. It came down off its back legs in one heavy lurch and closed the distance fast. Way too fast for something that big. I managed to get off a third shot, lower abdomen, angled in, and it must have connected somewhere soft because it made the creature jerk sideways mid-stride. That gave me just enough time to scramble left and duck behind a boulder jutting out from the slope wall. I hit the ground hard, gritted my teeth, and waited, chest heaving under the weight of the vest. The creature let out another hruff, closer this time. The sound echoed off the stone around me, low and steady like a warning. Then came the scraping, claws dragging slowly across rock. Not charging, not stomping, just moving deliberately. I kept my breathing shallow and stayed absolutely still, counting every second. I didn't fire again. I didn't move. I just listened. The minutes turned into hours. The sky shifted from orange to black, and I watched shadows creep across the ground. I never saw it again that night. But every 20 or 30 minutes, I'd hear another hruff, or the soft shuffle of movement along the ridgeline above, just enough to let me know it hadn't left. It was waiting, testing, maybe even watching. I stayed hidden behind that boulder for 6 hours. No food, no water, just stillness and that constant feeling that I was being hunted. I could see my breath fogging up in the cold air, and I didn't remove the respirator until the sun finally crept over the treetops. Full daylight came slow, the kind that takes forever to actually feel warm. When the light hit strong enough to cast real shadows again, I stood up cautiously and did a full sweep of the area. The creature was gone. No blood trail, no sound. But the ground around my position was wrecked. Massive paw prints pressed deep into the soft dirt. Some near the boulder, some even closer. Each one was easily 14 inches long, with claw drags that cut several inches into the soil. It had circled me, multiple times. Close enough that if I'd so much as sneezed, it might have finished the job. I didn't stick around. I moved fast, kept the safety off, and retraced my way back to the ridge I'd climbed. My ankle was still tender from the earlier descent, but adrenaline did most of the work. I hit the trail by mid-morning and got back to the truck before noon. Dust clouded behind me as I tore down the dirt road, hitting asphalt with tires screeching and hands still trembling. I didn't go home. I went straight to my father. He was a park ranger stationed about 30 miles south of where I'd been. I didn't call first. Just showed up, still wearing the vest, respirator hanging loose around my neck, and face looking like I'd just crawled out of a war zone. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. We sat in his office, door closed, blinds drawn, and I told him everything. Not in dramatic detail, just the facts. The stench, the gunfire, the prints, the hours hiding behind a rock waiting for something I couldn't kill to decide whether or not to finish me off. He didn't laugh. He didn't doubt me. He just sat there quietly and then asked, "How tall when it stood upright?" I said 14 feet, maybe a little more. "Did it make any sounds?" I told him about the hruff, the scraping, the way it seemed to track without charging. His face changed when I said that part. Not panic, just this grim, quiet acceptance. Then he told me something I've never forgotten. "They've been out there a long time," he said. "We don't talk about them. Not on record. Not even in the service logs. But yeah, you're not the first." He leaned back and rubbed his eyes. He said rangers had been tracking strange sightings since the late 60s. Deep in the Appalachian stretch between West Virginia and parts of southern Pennsylvania. Always isolated. Always hard to prove. A few hikers who never came back. Some hunters who got spooked bad enough they left their rifles behind. And occasionally, someone like me. Someone trained, armed, and lucky enough to walk away. According to him, the official belief was that they were relic species. Not supernatural, not aliens, just holdouts. Maybe Gigantopithecus or something close. Something science thought was extinct. 3 or 4 of them max. Solitary, range-based. They rarely came down into human territory unless pushed, usually drought or fire. But every few years, someone would stumble into one's path, and the ranger office would get quiet for a while. Files disappeared. Radios stayed silent. The government didn't want panic, and even if they did go public, nobody would believe it. He made me promise I wouldn't talk about it. Not to the press, not online, not even in confidence. "They're not monsters," he said. "They're survivors. Let them be." I kept that promise for 12 years, but something's changed out there. Too many clear-cut operations. Too many deep well drills punching into places no one's touched before. If they're being pushed closer to us, people deserve to know. These aren't bears. They aren't legends. They're real. And they're still out there, watching, waiting, just beyond the trees, just beyond. When I was 9, my family spent every summer at a lakeside campground in Michigan with the same group of old friends. The place had this mix of rickety RVs and canvas tents pitched in the same spots year after year. We always stayed in the pine grove near the eastern edge of the lake, not far from the dirt trail that led into the woods. My dad and his buddy Ray, Uncle Ray to me, would haul coolers of beer out by noon, chain smoke under the awning, and laugh like kids the second they got out there. One of their favorite traditions was something called the ghost wolf hunt. They only did it once a summer, always during a full moon. It was their version of a scary story game to freak us out. They made up this tale about a glowing-eyed creature called the ghost wolf that prowled the woods at night, hunting bad kids who didn't listen to their parents. The story changed a little each year. Sometimes the wolf had chains, sometimes it could mimic voices. But the point was always the same. Stay close, or else. The younger kids were kept out of it. But that summer, I'd finally earned my spot. I'd passed the bravery test or whatever, which meant I got to go into the woods with the older kids and play the full version of the game. We armed ourselves with slingshots made from forked sticks and rubber bands, and grabbed flashlights from our tents. The flashlights were mostly junk, dim yellow beams that cut maybe 10 feet through the dark. A couple of kids brought walkie-talkies, but they were the toy kind and barely worked. We met up just past the fire pit, around 9 p.m., and waited for the signal. The adults stood at the edge of the woods holding beers, pretending to take it seriously. My dad gave me a wink. That was the last normal moment. The plan was already in place. Uncle Ray would disappear 20 minutes before the hunt, hide deeper in the trees, and then leap out at us pretending to be a wounded hunter. He'd be drenched in fake blood, mostly ketchup and some corn syrup, and screaming about how the ghost wolf attacked him. It was supposed to be a good scare, not too much, just enough to send us running back to camp laughing and yelling. At first it worked. We split up in pairs and started hunting, sweeping our flashlights through the trees and making sound effects to scare each other. Then, right on cue, Uncle Ray exploded out of the bushes with a loud scream, shirt soaked red, one hand clutched to his ribs. He yelled something about the wolf being real, told us to run. Kids shrieked and scattered like spooked birds. I hesitated, maybe trying to act brave, then turned and sprinted too. But I didn't stop at the usual turnaround point. I kept going, past the familiar logs and stumps, deeper into the woods. I wasn't trying to break the rules. I just lost track of where I was. The game was supposed to last 10 minutes. Then we'd all meet at the old picnic table and drink bug juice like it was Gatorade. But I'd gone too far. I turned left when I should have stayed straight. Trees looked the same. The flashlight was dimmer by the second. That's when I saw the oak tree. It was huge, bigger than any of the others, and had this hollow at the base like something had clawed it out over the years. The opening was big enough for me to crawl inside. I did. My knees brushed damp bark. I clicked off my flashlight and sat with my back against the inside, trying not to breathe too loud. It felt like a safe hiding spot. I figured someone would find me soon. I waited. 5 minutes. Maybe 10. I could still hear kids laughing, their voices drifting through the trees. They were calling to each other, not for me. I stayed put, assuming it was all part of the game. Then the sounds faded. No more footsteps, no crunching leaves, no laughter. Just the wind in the branches and a mosquito buzzing near my ear. I held my breath. Then I heard it. A twig snap. Not far. I turned the flashlight back on, pointed it out of the hollow. Nothing. Just trees and blackness. I waited again, heart ticking faster. Another snap. Then a low grunt. I thought maybe someone was still in character, pretending to be the ghost wolf or something. "Okay," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You found me." No answer. A few more seconds. Then something moved just outside my light's range. Slow, heavy footsteps, not kid-like. I clicked off the flashlight again and shrank into the hollow, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps stopped. Silence. My legs started to cramp, but I didn't move. I could hear my own breathing now, louder than I wanted. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time. Crunch. 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 I tensed. My hand was around a stick I'd brought as a slingshot handle, completely useless. I wanted to call out for Uncle Ray, but my voice wouldn't come. The steps circled the tree once, then stopped again. I waited, sweat dripping into my eyes. Then I heard a rustling, closer than before, followed by something scraping the bark right outside the hollow. The beam of another flashlight passed through the trees, quick and careless. Someone was nearby, not close enough to see me, but moving around. I opened my mouth to yell, but something about the movement outside froze me. The scraping continued. Fingernails maybe, or a stick. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The footsteps moved away, crunching softly until they faded completely. I waited a long time after that. I don't know how long. The moonlight filtered through the branches and made everything look washed out and unreal. I counted in my head. When I reached 200, I crawled out of the hollow, slowly, every movement deliberate. The woods were quiet. No laughter, no flashlights. Just that feeling, like something was still there, just out of sight. That's when I saw it moving between the trees. At first I thought it was just another kid crawling around on hands and knees, maybe trying to scare me. But the shape wasn't right. The limbs were longer than they should have been. Its back had a strange arch, too high in the middle and dipped near the rear, like a sick animal. It moved in quick, jerking motions, on all fours, but not like any dog I'd ever seen. It didn't stumble or hesitate. Every step felt slow and intentional, like it was stalking. I couldn't hear it breathing, but I could feel it, like its presence pushed against the air. I sank lower into the hollow, bringing my arms in tight and tilting my head so I could see without moving. It stopped maybe 20 feet away, just inside the circle of trees, and turned its head in my direction. I froze. I could see the silhouette clearly now. The arms, or front legs, whatever they were, bent the wrong way at the joints. Its body was long, too long, and completely still. It didn't twitch or shift, just crouched there, staring. I don't know if it saw me, but it looked like it did. It felt like it did. It crept forward another foot. The leaves didn't rustle under it. It was totally silent except for these soft, wet clicks coming from its mouth, like it was tasting the air. I stopped breathing. I could feel my chest tightening from holding it in too long, but I didn't dare make a sound. My flashlight sat dark beside me, still warm in my hand. I was too afraid to turn it on. I didn't know if light would make it go away or bring it closer. Then it moved again. Not toward me, but around me, circling. It sniffed the air. I could hear the breaths now, short, fast inhales, like a dog catching a scent trail. The thing moved around the oak tree once, then twice. I could hear the damp leaves shifting under its hands, still clicking, still sniffing. Then my dad's voice broke through the trees, faint at first, but clear. He was calling my name, not frantically, just casually, like he hadn't realized anything was wrong. The creature stopped. Its head turned sharply in the direction of the sound. I could see the back of its skull tilt, as if listening. Then it twisted around and looked at me again. Just a second longer. Then it bolted, gone in an instant, melting into the dark like it had never been there. I didn't move until my dad's flashlight beam landed on my face. He looked relieved, then confused. "There you are," he said. "You had us looking everywhere." Uncle Ray was behind him, grinning like the night had gone perfectly. I stepped out of the hollow on shaking legs. My knees buckled once, and Dad caught my arm. "You okay?" I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words didn't come out right. I said something about a thing with long arms. Uncle Ray laughed and said, "That's what the ghost wolf's supposed to look like." He ruffled my hair and added, "You did good, kid. That hollow's a smart hiding spot." We walked back to camp with their flashlights bouncing ahead of us. I kept looking over my shoulder. Nothing followed. At the fire pit, everyone else was already back, roasting marshmallows and talking like nothing strange had happened. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the tent listening to the sounds outside. Every little crack of a branch made me sit up. Every gust of wind felt like breath on the tent wall. It's been 20 years. I haven't told many people about that night because no one ever believed me. Not even back then. I tried convincing myself I imagined it, that maybe the story and the shadows just messed with my brain. But I know what I saw. I remember the way it moved, the way it watched me. I live in a different state now, a long way from that lake, those trees. I got married. I've got 2 kids of my own. We visit my parents in Michigan some summers, but I don't let the kids go out after dark. We still do campfires, still make s'mores. My dad even told the ghost wolf story last year. The kids loved it. But I made sure the flashlight batteries were fresh. I kept one in my pocket the whole night. Last month, I went for a walk in the woods behind my neighborhood. It was early evening. The sun was low, and the trees were casting those long, narrow shadows across the trail. I'd been down that path 100 times before. Nothing ever felt strange about it. But that day, about a mile in, I got that feeling, tight in the chest, like something was behind me. I stopped, listened, heard nothing. No birds, no bugs, just wind moving through the leaves. I didn't turn around. I just walked faster. Not quite running, but close. I didn't stop until I reached my car and slammed the door behind me. I didn't see anything, but I didn't need to. Some things don't change. The woods are still the woods. And whatever I saw that night in Michigan, it might still be out there. Maybe it wasn't part of the game. Maybe it never was. So when I was 42, my wife and I decided to leave the city and buy an old farmhouse about 40 minutes from Topeka. It sat alone, out past where the road turned to gravel, right on the edge of a massive wheat field. The field stretched so far you could barely see the end of it on a hot day when the heat shimmered above the grass. There was a narrow tree line wrapping the far side of the property, and our realtor mentioned casually that the area had once belonged to the Kansa tribe. My wife liked that. She's always been into history. Our teenage son, Jonah, wasn't too thrilled. He had a girlfriend and a part-time job at the movie theater back in the city. But we thought the change might help. We wanted out of the noise, the crowds, the constant pressure. Just peace and space and time to breathe. The first month was calm. We fixed up the porch swing and painted the guest room. I replaced the filters in the HVAC and finally had space to build the workbench I'd always talked about. Nights were so quiet we could hear coyotes howling miles away. Jonah hated the quiet. He kept his door shut and started sleeping with earbuds in. I didn't push. I figured he'd adjust. Then, we started finding dead animals in the yard. Small ones at first. Rabbits, birds. No visible wounds, just stiff, still bodies. My wife said it might be pesticide from a neighbor's farm, but we didn't really have neighbors, not within walking distance. After a week, we found a raccoon near the back shed, mouth open, eyes wide. Still no marks. I buried it with the others. Our cars got scratched next. Deep, clean lines along the sides. They looked deliberate. Too parallel and evenly spaced to be random. The scratches were low, just above the wheels. Jonah swore he hadn't done it. I believed him. My wife started locking the garage at night. Then the noises started. Something walking on the roof. Heavy, steady steps. Always around 2 in the morning. I went outside a couple of times with the big flashlight but never saw anything. The next day, there'd be nothing. No footprints, no marks on the shingles. My wife suggested raccoons or maybe possums. Jonah started sleeping on the couch with the living room TV on low. One night I stayed up with him. At 2:17, I heard the steps again, clear and steady, walking above us. I looked at him, and he just stared straight ahead, not saying a word. That's when I called my older son, Robert. He was 27 and had just lost his job in Kansas City. I told him he could stay in the guest room if he needed time to figure things out. He showed up the next day with his pit bull, Rex. Robert had always been steady, solid, the kind of guy who didn't scare easy. Rex was the same, muscular, calm, trained. Having them both around made the place feel safer, at least for a while. A few nights after Robert moved in, Rex started acting strange. It was about 9:30 p.m., dark outside, and we were finishing up some sandwiches in the kitchen. Rex got up from under the table and walked to the back door, whining. Not barking, just this high-pitched whining, tail tucked. He scratched once at the door. Robert looked at me and said, "That's not normal." I grabbed a flashlight and clipped Rex's leash on. The second we stepped off the porch, Rex tried to turn around and drag me back to the house. That's when I caught the smell. Rotten fish, maybe mixed with something like wet fur. It came in thick, like a cloud, right as the wind shifted. I gagged and pulled my shirt over my nose. Rex growled, low in his throat, and backed up until his chest hit my leg. I swung the flashlight toward the trees. Nothing. Just the wheat field swaying in the dark. Then I panned left, along the edge of the porch light's reach. That's when I saw it. A figure, hunched low near the ground, standing just outside the circle of light. It wasn't fully visible, almost translucent. Grayish, long-limbed, with a narrow face and thin arms that dangled nearly to its knees. Its eyes were what hit me hardest. Tiny, black, and shiny like wet stones, they reflected the porch light in a way that made my stomach drop. I didn't move. Neither did Rex. The thing didn't move either. It just stood there, maybe watching, or waiting. I took one slow step back, then another, still facing it. Rex stayed close, head low, tail between his legs. When I reached the porch stairs, I pulled the leash hard and practically dragged him up the steps. Once we were inside, I locked the door and pulled the curtain shut. Robert was already standing in the hallway. "You see something?" he asked. I nodded once and said, "Yeah." The fear that hit me was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. Sharp, instinctive, primal. Rex clawed at the floor as I dragged him in, both of us stumbling through the kitchen. I slammed the door, locked it, and shouted for the others. My wife came out of the bedroom groggy, but Robert was already up, holding his rifle. Jonah stood in the hallway, silent, eyes wide. I opened the gun safe and grabbed my own rifle, then tossed a flashlight to Robert. We didn't talk. We just moved. Outside, the cold air hit me first, and then the silence. No insects, no wind, just dead quiet. Our boots crunched on the gravel as we swept our lights over the yard. The wheat field rustled faintly in the distance, but there was nothing moving near the house. We started toward the barn, and that's where we found the marks. 3 long gouges carved into the wood siding, almost 7 feet up. Too high for a coyote, too deep for claws. They weren't scattered either. They were clean, straight, evenly spaced. I ran my fingers along one and felt splinters. Robert stared at them without a word. We circled the house, checked the porch, the shed, even the roof again. Nothing. The thing was gone. I stayed up the rest of the night at the window, watching the edge of the trees, listening for footsteps that never came. Wildlife control showed up the next afternoon. A guy in his 50s stepped out of a state truck, clipboard in hand. He listened to our story, inspected the barn, and scratched his chin. "Could be a sick coyote," he said, "or a bobcat. Sometimes they get brave if they're starving or have rabies." He looked at the gouges again. "Might be a bear passing through. They mark trees this way." But he didn't sound convinced. Before he left, he gave us a number to call in case we saw it again. I asked him if bears could walk rooftops. He just looked at me and said, "Not quietly." That was the first official report, the first of many. The next few months blurred together. Sometimes we went weeks without anything happening. Then there'd be a burst. Scratches, missing animals, the sound of something walking along the porch in the middle of the night. Our dog stopped sleeping near the doors. He'd curl up in the laundry room and whimper when it got dark. Jonah started sleeping with his light on. Robert cleaned his rifle 3 times a week. I stayed up later. My wife stopped arguing about any of it. We put up motion sensors, floodlights, game cameras on every tree facing the house. They helped a little, at least for our nerves, but the footage never showed anything clear. Just shadows moving at the edges. Once, the barn lights flicked on, and the camera caught a blur. Tall, misshapen, walking upright. But it was gone before the second frame. Sometimes the sensors would go off 2, 3 times a night. Other times, it'd be dead quiet for weeks. It never came to the house directly again, but we always knew when it was close. You could feel it in the walls, like a pressure, like waiting for something to knock that never did. It went on like that for years. 4 of them, exactly. Our lives bent around it. We timed our chores before sundown. Rex wouldn't step past the porch unless the sun was high. Robert started sleeping with his rifle under his bed instead of next to it. Jonah moved out at 19 and didn't come back. My wife and I stopped hosting friends. People from town stopped asking why. Then the drought came. The winter was dry, and by March, the soil cracked. By May, every creek had turned to dust. Our pond disappeared in less than 2 weeks. The cornfields near town turned gray. The wheat never even came in. The heat was heavy, unmoving, and the air hung with static. You could see the desperation in the animals. Raccoons drinking from gutters, deer wandering close to the highways. And then, just like that, the visitation stopped. No footsteps on the roof. No lights triggered. No sounds near the barn. Even Rex seemed to notice. He went back to the back door, waited to be let out again. He still looked out across the field before stepping down, but the fear was gone. Robert said maybe the thing had moved on. I wasn't so sure. Weeks passed, then months. Still nothing. Robert eventually moved back to Kansas City. Jonah stopped returning my calls, but I couldn't blame him. My wife started talking about renting out the guest room. "People are moving out here now," she said. "It's peaceful." She started leaving the porch light off at night. I don't. Even now, years later, I still glance at the trees before I step outside. I still walk the perimeter of the house before bed. That barn still has the gouges. I never painted over them. Just sealed the wood around them and left it. I never told anyone what I really saw that night. How the thing didn't move like an animal. How its eyes didn't blink. How it didn't look curious or scared or angry. It looked patient. Whatever it was, it needed something from the land. Something it only got when the rivers flowed and the grass grew high. When that dried up, so did it. But droughts end. Water comes back. And when it does, so might everything else. I still don't go outside after dark. And if you ever move out this way, you shouldn't either. When I was 19, I worked night security at an industrial complex in New Jersey. It was mostly warehouses and shipping centers, all fenced off from the main road, with only one entrance that had to be manually unlocked each night. There were two of us on shift, me and Frank, an older guy who'd been working security jobs since the late 90s. He didn't talk much unless you asked him something specific, but once he warmed up, he had a lot to say. Frank was the type who'd seen enough to know most people weren't as harmless as they looked. He always said the real threats weren't ghosts or demons, it was people. Desperate ones, unstable ones, the ones you didn't see coming. Most nights were quiet. We'd do rounds every couple hours, walking the perimeter, checking locks, making sure nobody was trying to steal copper wiring or fuel. There was this gravel lot behind one of the older buildings where we'd sit in the company pickup and drink burnt coffee out of a thermos while listening to the radio. That night, the radio was off. We were parked with the engine idling when Frank pointed his flashlight across the lot and said, "What the hell is that?" I looked and saw what looked like a dark shape lying near the fence. We drove over. It was a dead dog. Looked like a mutt. Big, maybe 40 pounds, with its chest torn open. A few feet away was another, and farther down the fence line, a third. All of them were in the same condition, ripped open, but not eaten. There were no signs of dragging, no prints nearby, and the bodies were just dropped. It didn't look like coyotes or other dogs had done it. Frank crouched down and examined one. "No blood trail," he muttered. "Something killed them fast and left them." He stood up and looked around. "You ever seen a feral pack tear up animals and then just leave them?" I said no. I told him we should call animal control, or at least report it to the manager in the morning. He just shook his head. "By then it could be a bigger mess. If it's dogs, we can scare them off. If it's something else, I don't want to leave it to chance." He had this old metal flashlight, heavy as a brick, and pulled it from his belt. "Let's see where the trail goes." I didn't argue. I followed him with a smaller LED light, scanning the gravel and patchy grass. There were a few small blood drops, but no real trail at first. Then we noticed the way some of the bushes near the fence were bent, like something had pushed through in a hurry. We slipped through and found a few tufts of fur, maybe from the dogs, maybe not. From there we followed a narrow path behind some storage containers until we saw more blood, this time smeared like something had been dragged. There were stray cats and raccoons in that area all the time, but that night, everything was dead quiet. We saw a rat bolt out from under a pallet and vanish into the dark. A few minutes later, a pair of strays came racing past us, running like they'd been spooked hard. A raccoon darted from the direction we were heading and ran into the fence like it didn't even care what was in front of it. Frank stopped and held out his arm. "You smell that?" I sniffed the air. There was something metallic, like blood, but mixed with rot. He didn't wait. He picked up the pace, and I stayed close behind. The trail led us toward the edge of the complex where the buildings hadn't been used in years. At the very end was the old machine shop, a 2-story cinder block structure with broken windows and a caved-in loading dock. As we got closer, we could hear noises from inside. It was hard to describe, like claws scraping metal, but also wet. Like someone tearing apart soaked fabric or breaking thick rope. We stopped a few yards from the back door, which was half off its hinges. Frank motioned for me to stay back and stepped closer. "Probably a raccoon or some junkie squatters," he said over his shoulder, like he was trying to convince himself. He stepped up onto the dock, the wood creaking under his weight, and cleared his throat loud enough to echo. "Security. If anyone's in there, come out now." No response. Just more of that awful noise. Then it stopped. Completely. He turned to me. "Stay here. I mean it. Don't come in unless I yell." I nodded. He pulled his flashlight and stepped inside. I waited at the edge of the dock, peeking through the broken door. I could barely see anything inside. There was an overturned workbench, a rusted-out drill press, and shadows moving across the floor from his light. Then I heard him say, "What the f—" and the words cut off. There was a crashing sound, metal against concrete, and then silence. The thing that turned around wasn't human, but it wasn't an animal either. It was crouched low, knees bent sideways, arms dangling down to its shins, pale skin stretched tight across bones like wet tissue. It had no hair. Its face looked melted, but the eyes were wide and forward-facing like a person's. Its fingers, if you could call them that, were too long, with black claws that curved like hooks. It was hunched over the last of the dead dogs, one claw hooked under its jaw, holding it still while the other hand tore at its belly. When our light hit it, it froze, slowly turning its head toward us. It made a sound I didn't know a throat could make, like metal twisting in reverse, a wet, rising pitch that vibrated in my ribs. I wanted to move, but my legs didn't respond. Frank took a step forward, raising his taser. "Back away," he shouted. The thing didn't. It blinked once, too slow, and then bolted toward him like it had been launched. Frank fired but missed. He didn't get a second chance. The creature hit him chest first, knocking him to the ground with a crash. I couldn't see much, just shadows moving fast, but I heard the tearing. It was like someone ripping a raw steak apart. Frank screamed once, a short, high-pitched gasp that cut off mid-breath. I took a step forward without thinking, but the thing turned its head toward me. Its mouth was red and open, lips stretched wide. I couldn't move. I wanted to pull him away, or scream, or fight, but I couldn't. All I could do was watch. It slashed through Frank's vest like it wasn't even there, claws sinking deep into his ribs. I saw his boots twitch once. That was the last movement he made. I don't remember deciding to run. I just remember being halfway down the gravel path, flashlight clattering from my hand, boots slipping in mud and blood. I turned every few seconds, sure it was behind me, but nothing followed. Not right away. I ran the full distance to the security checkpoint, half a mile of empty buildings and chain-link fences. My key fob nearly slipped from my hands as I fumbled it against the lock, but I got inside and slammed the door behind me. The lock clicked into place. I backed into the corner and slid down the wall, gasping for air. Frank's blood was on my hands, sticky and drying fast. I could still hear that sound it made, like something dying and proud about it. I checked the camera feeds, but 2 of the exterior ones were already out, black screens. The others didn't show anything moving. I waited. Every creak in the walls sounded like footsteps. Every rat scuttling in the ducts made my skin twitch. An hour passed. Then another. Then I heard a scraping noise at the side of the building. Something was outside. It didn't try to break in. It just scratched slowly along the metal siding, up and down, like it wanted me to know it was there, like it wasn't in a hurry. At sunrise, it stopped. The police came with 2 cruisers and an ambulance. I opened the door with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to explain what happened, but they looked at me like I was either lying or broken. Frank's body was found near the machine shop, torn apart, half buried under a pile of old tires and scrap. The responding officers didn't say much, but I could tell they didn't buy my story. One of them leaned in and said, "You're in shock, kid. Sometimes the brain fills in blanks with nightmares." I asked him if wild dogs had opposable thumbs. He didn't answer. They took my statement, but a week later, the official report said Frank had been attacked by a feral animal, likely dogs or possibly a cougar. The torn security vest, the claw marks that looked like fingers, they were omitted. The body cam footage from the officers, gone. I called the evidence department to ask about it. They said the hard drives had been cleared during a system upgrade. I tried to contact Frank's family. His sister lived upstate. She never called me back. I guess she didn't want to hear from the kid who let her brother die. I never went back to the complex after that. I left my uniform in the locker and mailed in my badge. I worked warehouse jobs after that. Day shifts only. The insurance company issued a statement claiming no fault. The security firm replaced Frank within a week. The new guy probably never heard the full story. Maybe they told him Frank had a heart attack. Maybe they told him nothing. I think about it sometimes. Late at night when things are quiet and too still. I remember the way the other animals ran from that place. Like they knew what lived there. Like they'd seen it before. Maybe it wasn't the first time. Maybe it's still there, under the floorboards of that machine shop, waiting for the next cold night and the next idiot with a flashlight. I've tried to convince myself it was just a person, some lunatic, twisted and feral. But even that doesn't sit right. Nothing human moves like that. Nothing human kills like that and leaves no trace. People like explanations. They need them, even if they're lies. But I don't need one anymore. I just want to forget. It happened 3 years after we moved into the cabin. At first, everything was good. That first winter, we chopped our own wood, tended the goats, collected eggs. The kids were still young enough to enjoy being disconnected from city life. We had this fireplace in the center of the living room, real old stone, and we'd all sit around it most nights with books or puzzles. That night in October, I was sitting in my chair with a book. My wife was putting the kids to bed, and everything was quiet except for the fire crackling and a soft breeze through the chimney. Then the chickens started making noise. Not the usual clucking, but full-on panic. Squawking, flapping, crashing into the sides of the coop. I thought it might be a fox or coyote, maybe even a bear. I set my book down and went to the window to grab the flashlight. As soon as I stepped closer to the glass, I saw something. Not an animal, not right away. Just a shape. A dark silhouette standing still at the edge of the forest where the floodlight didn't reach. I thought maybe it was a person at first. But no. It was an elk. Big. Bigger than any I'd seen around here. Just standing there with its head raised, looking toward the house. It didn't move, didn't graze, just stared. I called my wife over. She came in quietly, asked what I was looking at, and I pointed. We watched together for a minute. She asked if it was sick. I didn't answer because I didn't know. Then the chickens stopped, just like that. No more panic, like someone had flipped a switch. The elk still didn't move. It must have stood there for an hour. My wife went back to bed, but I stayed at the window. I kept the light off and just watched it, waiting for it to do something else. It never did. Finally, it turned, walked back into the trees, slow and stiff like its legs hurt. That was it. I went outside with a flashlight and checked the coop. Nothing broken, no signs of anything trying to get in. But the birds were all huddled in the corner, pressed together and shaking. 2 weeks later, my wife shook me awake around 3 in the morning. She whispered that someone, or something, was outside the house. I sat up and listened. There was a sound like dragging. A long, slow scrape against the wood siding, moving from one end of the wall to the other. Then the sound of something heavy stepping over dry leaves. I got the shotgun from the closet. My wife followed behind me as I checked the kids' room. They were asleep, door shut. Then I checked the kitchen. Everything locked. Same for the back door. No windows open. I flipped off the light and stood by the front window, pulling the curtain back just a few inches. It was there again. The elk. Same size, same posture, same spot. A little farther back this time, partly behind a tree. Its body in shadow, just the faint shape of antlers visible in the moonlight. I stared at it for maybe 10 minutes, not moving. Then I heard the scraping sound again, from the opposite side of the house. It couldn't have been the elk unless there were two. My wife stayed in the hall with the kids. I made a full circuit through the house again, checking every window, every door. Nothing open, nothing forced. Back at the window, the elk was still there. It had turned its head slightly, like it was looking at a different part of the house. Then the scraping stopped. No movement, no sound. Just cold, still silence outside. The forest looked calm, but too calm. We stayed awake the rest of the night. Around 5, the elk was gone. Just vanished. When the sun came up, I went outside. The air was colder than usual. Sharp. I walked the perimeter of the house slowly. About halfway along the back wall, I stopped. There were scratches, deep ones, like claw marks. 3 long grooves, each maybe a foot apart, carved into the wood about 7 feet up from the ground. Too high for raccoons or coyotes. I measured with my hand. I'm 6 foot even, and I had to reach over my head to touch the top mark. The wood wasn't just scratched, it was dug into, like something with strong hands or tools had dragged them down slow and hard. I checked the ground beneath the markings. No footprints, no scat. Just leaves pressed down into the mud, too scattered to make sense of. My wife came out, saw the marks, and just stared. We didn't say much. I got the ladder and tried to sand down the grooves, but they were too deep. I covered them with a board. After that, we kept the kids from playing near the edge of the woods. I moved the coop closer to the house, added an extra lock to the back door. Every couple of nights, I'd hear something in the distance. Steps, a low rustle, sometimes a faint thumping on the ground, like something heavy had landed. But I never saw the elk again. Not for a while. By November, the elk started showing up every few nights, always at the same time, just after sunset. Sometimes I'd find it already there when I stepped out to feed the goats or check the shed. It never made a sound. It just stood still, half shrouded behind trees or fence posts, watching. I started carrying the rifle slung across my back even for the shortest chores. My wife noticed. She didn't say much, just looked at me differently, like I wasn't being honest with her about something. I wasn't. I didn't tell her about the morning I saw it on the forest trail. I didn't say how close it had come. I'd been walking to our neighbor's place, a mile and a half of rough dirt road winding through the trees. Cold air, quiet except for wind and boots crunching. Then I felt it, that pressure, like eyes on me. I turned and saw it, maybe 10 yards back. No cover, no pretense. Just standing in the open, its head level with mine, breathing slow. That's when I noticed the eyes. Human. White around the edges. Tiny focused pupils like it was trying to study me. It didn't blink. I didn't move. We stayed like that, frozen, until I took one step back and it vanished into the trees without a sound. My neighbor, a retired logger named Richard, listened while I told him everything. He didn't interrupt. He waited until I finished and then nodded like he'd expected it. Said some tribes believed in skinwalkers or shamans who could move between animal and human form, especially when the land had been misused or disrespected. Said some places weren't meant to be built on. I asked him if he really believed that. He looked at me, dead serious, and said, "It doesn't matter if I do. It matters if it does." I didn't laugh. He said the best thing we could do was leave. I didn't answer him. I didn't want to think about packing up and starting over again. But things got worse after that. One night, just after Thanksgiving, it came into the yard. Not near the woods, inside the yard, past the fence. It walked between the chicken coop and the goat pen like it owned the place, staring into the living room as we ate dinner. My youngest saw it first and started crying. My wife stood up, saw it too, and just froze. No one said a word. The elk didn't move. It stayed there for 10 minutes. I had my rifle beside the door, but I didn't reach for it. I knew, somehow, I couldn't shoot it. The goats screamed in their pen that night. The chickens barely laid any eggs the next day. The next night it came back, closer this time. I didn't sleep at all. After that, my wife refused to let the kids outside without both of us. The kids started sleeping with lights on. Our dog, who used to bark at everything from raccoons to mail trucks, wouldn't leave the porch anymore. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. Dread. Like we'd done something wrong by living there. Like we were trespassers. I kept thinking about what Richard said, that we weren't welcome, that something had been disturbed. I walked the property lines twice, looked for signs of an old foundation, a burial site, anything. I found nothing but trees, stones, silence. 2 weeks later, I put the house on the market. Told my wife we'd take the loss. She didn't argue. We told the kids we were going to be closer to their cousins and better schools. Packed up fast, left half the firewood behind. We drove out on a cold Sunday morning. I didn't look back at the tree line. We moved into a townhouse on the edge of Denver. Loud, busy street. Chain link fences and motion sensor lights. My wife started sleeping again. The kids got used to the noise. I took a job working nights at a distribution center. Nothing glamorous, but it keeps me busy. Every now and then, when I'm outside taking trash to the bins or walking to the car, I stop and scan the dark corners. My eyes still expect to find something standing there, watching. Nothing ever is. But I still carry a flashlight longer than I need. Still check the back windows twice before going to bed. People ask me why we left the cabin. I say the isolation got to us, that it wasn't for us, which is true, just not the whole truth. I still dream about the elk sometimes, about those eyes. They weren't confused or wild. They knew exactly what they were looking at. And I knew exactly what they meant. We didn't belong there. We were never supposed to. When I was 23, I worked construction in West Virginia, and my sister Amy drove me to work every morning through the winding hill roads. She had this old silver Honda with a cracked dashboard and a dent in the rear bumper from some parking lot incident that neither of us really cared about. I usually just leaned back in the passenger seat with my lunchbox under my legs and stared out at the woods while she played whatever morning show was on. It was early April, still cold, and most of the trees were just starting to get green again. The road we took ran alongside a stretch of pine forest that never looked the same 2 days in a row. Fog hung over it most mornings, and sometimes you'd see deer just standing perfectly still in the mist like statues. That Tuesday morning felt normal. The windows were fogged a little from the inside, and the heater clicked every few seconds like it always did. I was drinking gas station coffee out of a styrofoam cup and watching the tree line blur past. Then I saw something. About 50 yards off the road, there was a figure in the woods. At first I thought it was a deer, just the top of the head and antlers visible between the trees. But something about it made me sit up straighter and squint. It wasn't moving, just crouched low to the ground like a person squatting by a fire. And the way its head was angled, it didn't make sense. The face was too long and narrow, and it looked off-center, like someone had stretched the skin the wrong way. The antlers weren't right either. One was broken and jagged, and the other curled in a tight spiral like it had grown in on itself. But the worst part, the part that really hit me hard, was the eyes. Instead of being on the sides like every deer I've ever seen, both eyes were front-facing, staring directly toward the road like a predator would. It wasn't just looking, it was watching, focused, like it knew we were there, like it had been waiting. I didn't say anything right away. I just froze, locked eyes with it until the trees broke our view. Amy kept driving, humming along with some pop song on the radio, completely unaware. My heart was beating fast, but I didn't even know why yet. I looked back over my shoulder, expecting to catch another glimpse of it between the trees, but the spot was empty. Just a clearing with a bit of morning mist hovering over dead pine needles. "You see something?" Amy asked, noticing me twist in my seat. "Thought I saw a deer," I muttered. She didn't press, but it wasn't a deer. Not really. I tried to shake it off. Maybe the light was playing tricks on me, or maybe my brain just filled in the blanks wrong because it was too early and I hadn't slept enough. But it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like a mistake. The thing hadn't acted like a deer. It hadn't flinched, hadn't run, hadn't even moved. It just sat there like it was waiting for us. At lunch, I brought it up to Jim, one of the older guys on the crew. He was from up near Wheeling and always had stories about strange stuff out in the woods. He was leaning on his shovel eating from a Tupperware container, and when I mentioned what I'd seen, his face didn't change much. "What color were the eyes?" he asked. Didn't get close enough to tell. He just nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting that answer. "Could have been a sick one," he said. "Deer go weird when they get brainworms. Makes them act all wrong." That explanation didn't help, because even if it was sick, how did it disappear so fast? We were doing 45, and I looked back less than 5 seconds later. There should have been something there. A tail, tracks, even just the movement of branches. But there was nothing. No sign it had ever been there. The next morning, I paid more attention. The fog was heavier that day, clinging low over the road, but I kept my eyes on that same patch of trees. Nothing. Amy noticed me looking again. "You're really hunting that deer, huh?" I didn't answer. I was already leaning toward the window, trying to see through the fog. The woods felt different now. I couldn't explain how, but they did. Like something had shifted. For the next week, every ride to work became a routine of me watching the trees. And every day, I saw nothing. But that didn't stop the feeling. That tight, crawling sensation across the back of my neck. Like we were being watched the moment we turned onto that stretch of road. Amy stayed cheerful, totally unaware. But I couldn't shake it. Then on Sunday night, Amy had to work a night shift and asked if I could find another ride. I didn't mind. I asked Kevin, another guy on the crew, and he said he could swing by early. His route didn't go past the woods. The next morning felt normal again. Different trees, no fog, no sense of anything waiting in the dark. That's what scared me the most. The sudden absence of it. Like whatever had been watching knew I wasn't coming and just stopped. I didn't tell anyone else about it after that. Not even Jim. But from that day forward, I never looked at the woods the same way. And I never let Amy drive me down that road again. I didn't say anything to Amy right away because I knew how it would sound. When we got to the job site, I pulled Jim aside before the others showed up. We stood by the tailgate of his truck, and I told him everything I'd seen that morning, how the thing had crouched like a person and watched us with forward-facing eyes. He didn't interrupt me once, just stared at the ground and rubbed the back of his neck like he was working something out in his head. When I finished, he looked up at me, and his face had gone pale. "My cousin saw something like that last year," he said. "Up near Monongahela. Hunting trip, late October. Said it looked like a deer, but the eyes were wrong and it didn't act scared. Just stared him down." I asked what happened after that, and Jim said his cousin packed up and left the woods early. Didn't even grab the game camera he set up, he said. Just left it all there. That evening when I got home, I couldn't shake it. I kept thinking about the eyes, the way they followed us without blinking. After dinner, I pulled out my laptop and started looking around online. Most of what I found was the usual internet garbage, photoshopped pictures, creepypasta stories. But some posts described the exact same thing. A deer with human-like posture, predator eyes, antlers that looked like they'd grown wrong. A lot of the people writing them didn't say where they were from, but a few mentioned the Appalachian region. One person described it as a spirit that mimicked animals but never got them quite right. Another said it was something that watched people from the trees and remembered their faces. I closed the laptop and sat there staring at the wall. I wasn't ready to believe in legends, but I also couldn't ignore what I saw. That thing wasn't sick. It wasn't hurt or confused. It was watching us with purpose. So the next morning, I kept my eyes peeled the entire ride, same as the day before. Nothing. But every pine tree we passed looked more suspicious than it had a week ago. 3 days later, it was back. Same stretch of road, just past that bend where the old guardrail rusts out. This time it wasn't crouching. It was standing on its hind legs, front hooves pressed against the trunk of a pine tree like it was peering around it. For a second, I thought it was a man in some hunting gear wearing a mask, but the way it moved, that wasn't human. When it turned its head toward me, I didn't even think. I tapped Amy's shoulder and pointed out the window. There. She slammed on the brakes hard enough to spill coffee all over the center console. We both leaned forward at the same time and watched as the thing dropped back to all fours. But it didn't run. It walked. Slowly. Right between the trees. Its eyes never left us. Not once. Amy's hands were locked around the wheel like she was waiting for it to charge. Her voice was tight and low when she finally spoke. "That's not a deer," she said. "It walks like someone wearing a costume." We sat in silence for a full minute, staring into the woods. Nothing moved now. The thing had vanished again. When Amy started driving, she didn't say a word. Neither did I. That afternoon, Amy called our mom. She didn't mention the thing directly, just asked if she'd heard anything weird from the neighbors. Mom paused and said old Mrs. Henderson had been talking about something hanging around her chicken coop lately. She says it never tries to get them, Mom told her. Just stands there at the edge of her yard at night, watching. Scared her dog so bad it won't go outside anymore. Amy and I exchanged a look. We didn't need to say anything. The next morning, we left the house earlier and took the long way. It added 15 minutes to the drive, a whole loop through the valley and up past the quarry road. It was slower and rougher, but it avoided the pines. We didn't tell anyone we changed routes. We didn't have to. That was 8 months ago. We still take the long way, even when it snows. even when the bridge floods and the potholes rattle the frame of Amy's car. We never drive past that stretch of trees anymore. Never even talk about it. Jim brought it up once, just once, while we were having lunch in the gravel lot behind the site office. "You ever see that thing again?" he asked, quiet. I just shook my head. "No," I said, "and I don't want to. But sometimes I wonder. Sometimes I leave early and catch sight of the pines through the rearview mirror. Sometimes I think I see something between the trunks, a shape that doesn't move right, a glint of forward-facing eyes in the dark. And sometimes, when I'm in my room late at night, I imagine it standing in the woods off the back of our property, waiting, watching, like it remembers me. I've never been comfortable in the forest since then. I don't fish the creeks anymore. I don't hike. I don't walk the dog past the tree line. And every time I hear a branch snap or a leaf crunch outside my window, I get that old feeling again. The one from the passenger seat, with cold coffee in my lap and a shape watching from the trees. I don't know what that thing was, but it wasn't a deer, and it wasn't meant to be seen. So when I was 16, I lived with my parents in a mountain area of Virginia, where our nearest neighbor was half a mile away. The whole area was heavily wooded, mostly oak trees, and behind our house there was a narrow trail that ran through 30 acres of forest. I'd been walking that trail since I was maybe 7 or 8. It felt like part of my own backyard. The trees always stayed the same, the trail never changed, and the quiet out there was something I used to find relaxing. That September, after school one afternoon, I went out walking that trail just to get some air before it got dark. The weather was just starting to cool, and I had a hoodie on. I remember the ground being dry, and I was halfway down the path when I caught my foot on a root and stumbled hard. I cursed, loud. "Shit," I said, annoyed at myself, and kicked the dirt off my shoe. And maybe 5 or 6 seconds later, I heard it. My exact same voice repeating the same word. Shit. But it came from somewhere above me. Not behind. Not to the side. It came from up in the trees. I stopped walking and looked around. There was nothing. Just the creaking of branches and some birds way off in the distance. No one was up there. I stared at the canopy, at the thick tangle of branches. Everything was still. I waited maybe 30 more seconds, trying to hear if someone was climbing, rustling, laughing, anything. But there was no sound. Nothing else. I told myself it must have been an echo, even though I'd walked that trail hundreds of times and never heard anything echo there before. Still, it was easier to pretend that's all it was. At dinner that night, I mentioned it to my parents. Dad told me sound travel's weird up here. Hollows and hills bounce it around, he said with his mouth full. Mom guessed maybe it was a mockingbird. They can mimic anything. Maybe one picked it up from you, she said, almost like it was a joke. I nodded like I agreed, but I didn't. There was something off about the way it sounded. Not like a bird or an echo. It had the same breath, same tone, same rhythm I used. Like a recording. I didn't walk the trail much after that. At least not alone. In December, right before school let out for winter break, I brought my boyfriend Ethan Morris out to the old abandoned development site about a mile from our place. It was supposed to be a bunch of cottages for vacation rentals, but they ran out of money or permits or something. All that's left are the frames of maybe 6 houses, roofs half built, windows just holes. Most people don't know about it unless they grew up here, but I used to go out there sometimes to sneak smokes or just sit in the quiet. That day I wanted to impress Ethan. I told him I knew a cool place we could explore, and we parked his Civic on the gravel turnout just off the road. The sun was low but not quite down, and the air smelled like frozen dirt and wood. I led him through the little path into the clearing where the houses stood like empty skeletons. I dared him to try breaking into one, and he grinned and walked up to the first house with the plywood porch and no front steps. The door was shut, which was weird because they were usually left open or hanging off the hinges. He went up and started fiddling with the handle, pushing on it like it might give. Then we both heard it. 2 sharp knocks. Not from the outside, from inside the house, like someone knocking back. Then, clear as day, the metallic clunk of a deadbolt unlocking. Ethan froze with his hand still on the doorknob. I looked at him, and he looked at me. We both knew nobody was supposed to be in there. There was no power, no construction, no crews. The place was deserted. Neither of us said a word. Ethan just turned and took off running, and I followed. We sprinted back to the car, both of us breathing hard and not looking back. When we got in, he asked, "Did you hear that?" I nodded. That was all we said. We didn't talk much for the rest of the drive. The next day, I went back by myself. I didn't tell Ethan. I just wanted to see it in daylight. I parked farther down and walked in, trying to keep my footsteps quiet even though there was no one around. When I got to the house, the one with the deadbolt, the door was wide open. Just hanging there like someone had opened it for me. I stepped up onto the porch, careful not to crack the plywood. Inside, the house was empty like always. No tools, no furniture, just unfinished floorboards and studs. But on the floor, near the door, were muddy footprints. At least 4 of them, maybe 5. But the treads were wrong. Smooth soles, not like my boots or Ethan's sneakers. And they were small. Too small for Ethan. They didn't match any shoes I'd seen. I didn't go any farther inside. I backed out, careful not to step on the prints, and walked straight back to my car. I never told Ethan about going back. I didn't want him thinking I was obsessed, or worse, that I was imagining things. But I started sleeping with my window shut after that. Even though our heater sucked and the house got cold, I didn't want to take chances. Not with those woods. Not with whatever was out there. A month later, my friend Sophia Lee and I were driving back from a late movie when we saw an albino deer standing on the shoulder of Highway 33. At first, it just looked strange. Pure white with glassy eyes reflecting our headlights. But then it turned its head as we passed, twisting its neck far, too slowly, like it wasn't bound by normal movement. It didn't flinch or run. It just stared at us, tracking our car as we moved past. I felt my skin crawl. Sophia whispered, "Did you see that?" I nodded. Neither of us said anything else for a while. But that wasn't the only time. On the way back to her place, we saw it again. Different part of the road, same deer. Same broken neck movement. Third time was on the outskirts of town, near the grocery store parking lot. Just standing in the dark, watching us from the edge of a cornfield. Each time, its body didn't move, just the head turning to follow us. No twitching ears, no tail flick, no breathing. Later that week, our neighbor's cat went missing. 2 days after that, they found it lying behind their shed with its throat torn out. Nothing else touched. It hadn't been dragged or eaten, just killed and left there. I tried to tell myself it was a coyote or something, but there were no other marks on the body. No signs of a struggle. Sophia made a joke about the white deer being some kind of skinwalker, but even she didn't laugh. We stopped talking about it after that. I started checking all my windows every night before bed. Not just locking them, checking for shapes, shadows, anything standing outside. I started closing the curtains too, something I'd never cared about before. I couldn't prove anything was following me, but I could feel it. Something was. Last month, my parents went to visit my aunt and uncle in Roanoke. First time I'd been alone in the house overnight since everything started. I didn't want them to go, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. I waited until 10 to lock up, walking room to room, checking every door and window. When I got to my little brother's room, I pulled back the curtain by habit and saw a shape in the window. It wasn't pressed up close. It was maybe 5 or 6 feet away, standing just behind the bushes. But it was tall, taller than the window frame, and narrow, too narrow. It didn't look like a person or a deer, but something in between. Upright, but not shaped right. I couldn't breathe. I stood there frozen with the curtain half open, just looking at it. I couldn't see a face, but I could feel it looking back. The second I moved, it shifted, like it had been waiting to see what I'd do. I dropped the curtain and ran to my phone. I called the police. I didn't care how crazy I sounded. They showed up 15 minutes later. I was still shaking. The officers walked around with flashlights, checked the yard, the trees, the bushes. One of them pointed out deer tracks leading to the side of the house, but said there weren't any leading away. The ground was soft. It had rained the day before, but there were no prints under the window. Nothing where I saw it standing. One officer suggested maybe a deer had been reaching for tree branches, standing up like they sometimes do. "Probably spooked you," he said. I nodded, but I didn't believe it. I knew what I'd seen. Deer don't stand still like that. They don't wait. They don't watch. I don't go into the woods alone anymore. I used to walk that trail behind our property all the time, but now I can't even stand at the edge without feeling watched. My dad installed new security cameras on the corners of the house and motion lights in the backyard. He thinks I'm just being cautious because of the break-in across town. My mom thinks it's anxiety. She tells me to stop reading weird stuff online. But I have been reading. I've looked up stories, newspaper archives, message boards, and there are others. People in this region have reported seeing white animals that act strangely. Animals that mimic speech, that appear in places too far apart to be possible. I found a post from someone 3 towns over who heard their own voice calling them from the woods. They thought it was an echo at first. Another woman said something knocked on her door every night at 2:17 a.m. for a week, but her cameras never caught it. It always came from just outside the camera frame. The pattern I've noticed is always the same. First, the voice mimic, then the sightings, then the approach. They study you. They learn your routines. They know when you're alone. They wait, patiently. I tried to explain it to my parents once, just enough to suggest something weird was happening, not everything. They smiled and told me I was letting my imagination get to me. I nodded like I believed them, but I know better now. Whatever's been following me isn't a person, and it isn't an animal. It doesn't need to rush. It's been watching for over a year. It's listened to how I talk. It's seen where I sleep. And I think it's waiting for something. Not a time, but a moment. A mistake. An invitation. It's still out there. And it remembers everything. It happened last summer when I was 24 and living with my younger sister Kate in an isolated house in the Cascade foothills. Our place was surrounded by national forest, about an hour's drive from the nearest town. It wasn't a fancy house, just a single-story place with a wood stove and wide porch. But it was quiet and cheap. We had bears, mountain lions, and coyote packs in the area, so we'd always been careful about going out alone. Our old Saint Bernard had died that spring, and our new puppy wasn't big enough yet to be much protection. He mostly barked at squirrels and dragged sticks around the yard. In July, our neighbor Margaret Hayes asked me to tend her garden while she and her husband went fishing at the Pacific coast. I'd known Margaret since I was 9 and often helped her with yard work or moving firewood. Her garden was impressive, with neat rows of tomatoes, corn, and squash, all surrounded by deer netting tied to wooden stakes. She'd be gone for 5 days, so I agreed to water everything each morning. It seemed easy enough, especially since the weather had been hot and dry. The first morning I went down alone because Kate refused to get up at dawn. Margaret's property was in a small valley about a quarter mile from our house, accessible by a dirt path through the trees. It wasn't far, but the walk could feel longer with the summer heat and buzzing horseflies. I brought a big plastic jug of water for myself and wore boots because of the snakes. The trail was narrow and overgrown in parts, but I'd walked it many times. Her garden sat in a clearing that caught the morning sun, and a little wooden shed stood off to the side with a spigot for the hose. I rolled out the hose and started watering from one end, careful not to trample the squash vines. Everything looked normal, just birds chirping, insects buzzing, the usual stuff. But as I got closer to the far rows of vegetables, I noticed the bird songs gradually fading until there was complete silence. No rustling, no chirps, not even the wind. I looked around, expecting maybe a hawk overhead or a fox nearby, but saw nothing. I paused with the hose running, just listening. It felt like something was watching me, but there was no one. I shook it off and finished watering the cucumbers. I was just about to shut off the hose when I heard a familiar voice calling my name from the direction of the cornfield. It sounded exactly like Kate when she wanted to get my attention. Same tone and rhythm she'd used since we were kids. "Hey," it called. "Come here." I stood still, hose still dripping in my hand, and looked toward the edge of the corn. The stalks were tall now, maybe 5 feet, and thick. I couldn't see anything between them. I called back, asking what she wanted, but got no response. No rustling, no footsteps, just stillness. I waited a minute, then walked a few steps toward the corn. "Kate?" I said, louder this time. Still nothing. I looked down the path, thinking maybe she'd walked the long way around or hidden behind the trees. But I didn't see her anywhere. I knew Kate loved sleeping in too much to come down to the valley just to play a prank on me, and she hated bugs. She wouldn't have come through the trees or stood in the corn for a joke. I stood there for another couple minutes, watching the corn, listening. It felt wrong. I didn't like how quiet it was. After waiting a few more minutes and hearing nothing else, I turned off the hose, wound it back on the rack, and headed home. When I got back to the house, Kate was still in bed, exactly where I'd left her. The bedroom curtains were drawn shut, and the overhead fan whirred softly. I asked her if she'd gone out earlier, just to be sure, and she blinked at me like I was crazy. I told her about hearing her voice in the garden, how clear it was, how it even used her exact phrasing. She rubbed her face and laughed, half asleep. "Maybe it was a Wendigo," she said. "Or one of those forest things my friend Sarah talks about. Mimics or whatever." She was joking, clearly not taking me seriously. "They call you into the woods and eat your face," she added, and rolled over. I tried to laugh along with her, but something about the whole thing was still crawling under my skin. It wasn't just that I heard a voice. It was how precise it had been. Intonation, cadence, every detail. I made coffee and spent most of the day trying to push it out of my mind. But that night I kept glancing at the woods through the kitchen window. Before bed, I checked the front and back door locks twice, then went back to check them again 20 minutes later. I called Margaret's cell and left a message, trying to keep my voice casual, asking if she'd ever had strange sounds around the garden. She didn't call back that night. The next morning, Kate surprised me by saying she'd come help with the watering. She pulled on her boots and jacket while I leashed the puppy, who was already chewing on a sock. It was cool out. Quiet. We didn't talk much on the way down the path. Birds were singing again like normal. I started on the hose while Kate moved between rows, checking leaves and brushing off dirt. A few minutes in, the puppy wandered off, then came back dragging a limp squirrel in his mouth. It was fresh. I pulled it away from him, scolded him lightly, and carried him back up to the house to keep him from digging up any more wildlife. I rinsed my hands at the sink, filled his water bowl, and then jogged back down the path. When I got back to the garden, Kate was standing near Margaret's porch, pale and stiff. She didn't wave or say anything until I got right up to her. "I heard you," she said, calling me from the trees. Her face looked like she'd seen a car crash. "You said my name, just like you do when you want help with something. You know, that exact voice you use. I thought it was you at first, so I went toward the sound, but then I realized it was coming from behind the tree line. You were gone for maybe 10 minutes, right?" I nodded slowly. She looked at the woods. "It sounded exactly like you." I didn't answer right away. I just stood there next to her, facing the direction she'd pointed to. I felt like something was watching from in there, just beyond the reach of the sunlight. Maybe 10 yards in. Silent. We didn't talk much after that. We finished the watering quickly, barely looking at the plants, and walked home without a word, both of us turning around more often than we needed to. For the rest of the week, we never went to the garden alone. We brought the puppy with us each time, even though he was more interested in eating beetles than guarding anyone. Nothing strange happened those last few days. No voices, no silences. The garden was just a garden again, but we stayed together, side by side, never stepping more than a few feet apart. When Margaret and her husband came back, we helped them unload their gear and acted normal until I pulled her aside and told her what had happened. Her expression changed the moment I mentioned the voice. "My husband heard me calling him from the back field last summer," she said quietly. "But I was inside, cooking. We thought it was echoes bouncing around the valley. You know, like sound tricks." She looked at the trees. "I guess maybe it wasn't that." She didn't say anything else, and I didn't press her. I just nodded and went back to help Kate bring up the hose. Later that night, I tried to go over everything again. Maybe Kate was messing with me. Maybe I'd imagined it. But the voice I heard hadn't just been similar to hers. It had been identical. The kind of identical you can only get after years of growing up with someone. And the way she'd reacted, the way her voice shook when she told me what she heard. If she was faking, it was the best acting I'd ever seen. I don't have a clean answer for what happened. I never saw anything. Nothing moved in the woods. No shadows, no breathing. Just the voices. Both times it spoke when one of us was alone. Both times it sounded exactly like the other person. I keep coming back to that. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't someone doing an impression. It was something else. Something that watched and waited and studied. Something smart. Maybe it was just testing how good it was. Maybe it wanted to see how close it could get before we caught on. I think about that sometimes when I walk past the edge of the woods. How it never came too close. Not yet. When I was 19, 5 of us from college, me, Blake, Connor, Jamie, and Leo, went camping near the edge of a national park, just outside the boundary so we could bring our dogs. We had 2 black labs with us, Riley and Max. Blake and I had borrowed a family tent, and after a long drive and a few wrong turns, we found a quiet clearing not far from a creek. It felt isolated, but still had that "people have camped here before" vibe. We pitched the tent, made a fire ring with some stones, and cooked burgers on a small grill Jamie brought. As the sun started to dip, Leo and Jamie offered to get more firewood. They took Max with them, leaving Riley back at camp with us. About 20 minutes passed before they returned, looking weirded out and empty-handed. Max wasn't with them. They said they'd seen Blake weaving through the trees about 100 feet out. Same hoodie, same build. But something was off. They said he didn't respond to them calling his name. He just kept ducking between trees, almost like he was hiding. Then, he suddenly disappeared deeper into the brush, and Max ran after him. They chased after the dog for a few seconds but gave up when they heard whimpering, then nothing. When they came back, they were shaken and confused. Blake had never left the campsite. He'd been by the fire the whole time, roasting marshmallows and scrolling through his phone. Jamie even laughed awkwardly and said, "Maybe there's another camper wearing the same hoodie." I suggested it was a hiker, or maybe a bear on its hind legs. Leo looked pale and said it moved too smoothly to be an animal. Still, we were more concerned about Max than whoever or whatever they saw. We spread out with flashlights and called for Max for nearly an hour. No barking, no movement, just quiet. It started to get dark, and we smelled something faint in the air. Rotting meat. Blake thought it was a dead animal somewhere, but it came and went in bursts, like it drifted in the wind. We all noticed it but didn't talk about it much. Eventually, we gave up on finding Max and sat around the fire, quieter than before. The air felt heavier, and even Riley stayed curled up against the tent, ears low. That night, Riley wouldn't settle. He kept looking at the trees, growling low under his breath. None of us were sleeping well, but when Riley suddenly stood and let out this deep, constant growl, we all sat up. The same smell returned, stronger this time, and with it came this low, distant howling. Not a wolf or coyote. It was too long, almost mechanical, circling around us like it was moving through the trees. Leo fired off a flare. The red light lit up the woods, and for a second we all froze, waiting. Whatever was out there must have moved off, because the howling stopped. Riley stopped growling, but his body stayed stiff. After that, we agreed on taking shifts. Blake and I took the first. Jamie and Leo were next. Connor had third shift, from around 3:30 to 5 a.m. When Blake woke me up again at sunrise, we noticed Connor's sleeping bag was empty. His boots were gone, but his flashlight was still next to his pillow. We called for him, checked the tent, looked around camp, nothing. Then we heard a rustling from the woods. Blake spotted him walking back through the trees from the direction of the creek. His eyes looked glassy, and he was stumbling like he was drunk. When he got close, he acted like nothing was wrong. He said he must have sleepwalked. We stared at him. None of us had ever heard him talk about sleepwalking. He said he woke up just a few minutes ago near the creek. His pants were soaked up to the knees, and he had leaves and dirt in his hoodie. His hands were twitching slightly, which I hadn't seen before, and his nails looked like he'd been clawing at something. Blake tried to joke that he pulled a nature zombie act, but nobody laughed. When I handed Connor a protein bar, he refused it and pulled out a can of beef stew instead. He ripped it open and started eating cold chunks straight from the tin. That wasn't too weird by itself, but the way he ate, mechanical, like he hadn't eaten in days, made it unsettling. Also, The stew had been meant for emergencies, and we hadn't touched it. He ate it like it was the only thing he could tolerate. Later that morning, Jamie brought up leaving early. No one argued. Connor was standing by the fire, scraping soot from the grill with a stick. When Jamie mentioned packing up and leaving, Connor spun around and said we should stay. Said he'd get more firewood and that he was feeling good now. We asked him why he'd go alone. He just smiled and said, "It's fine. I know where to go." It was still pitch black beyond the firelight. We were all quiet, but nobody said no. Connor grabbed Riley's leash like he was going to take the dog with him, but Riley backed up behind the tent and wouldn't move. Connor waited for a second, looked off into the dark trees and said, "I'll be back quick." Then he stepped into the woods. After Connor left with the leash, we sat quietly around the fire. No one said much. We were all staring into the flames when Jamie asked how many sleeping bags we had. I looked toward the tent. There were 4 of us now, but 5 sleeping bags. The 5th one was zipped up, just like the others, and laid out exactly where Connor's had been. Leo reached out and touched it. Still warm. Not just residual heat warm, but like someone had been lying in it minutes ago. I remember Jamie saying, "He took his bag, right?" But none of us had actually seen him grab it. Blake pulled it open. Empty. That's when the argument started. Leo was convinced Connor was messing with us, some twisted prank or bet. Jamie said the voice last night didn't sound like a prank. I hadn't said anything yet, but I was thinking the same thing. Something wasn't right. Around midnight we heard it. Someone calling from the trees. "Guys, I need help." It was Connor's voice, but the words were stiff, off rhythm, like he was struggling to imitate how people actually sound. It came again, from a different direction. "Help me. Please." Same voice, different tone, higher pitched. Wrong again. Every 10 or 15 minutes it would call out from somewhere else. And in between, we'd hear that laugh. Connor's laugh, but not in a real way. It sounded placed, like someone had watched a video of him laughing and was trying to recreate it. Jamie stopped responding after the second time. Blake just kept throwing wood onto the fire without saying a word. By 3 a.m., no one was speaking, just sitting, listening, watching shadows. The fire burned hot until dawn. We never saw anything between the trees, only heard it. Just before sunrise, Connor walked out of the woods carrying branches, smiling, calm, like he'd only been gone 20 minutes. "Found dry stuff," he said. He looked at us. No one moved. I don't even think we breathed. He tossed the branches into the fire pit and started unzipping his empty sleeping bag without a word about the night before. No mention of voices. No apology for being gone. Nothing. We packed in complete silence. No one had to say we were leaving. Everyone just started folding gear. It felt wrong to turn our backs on Connor, but it felt worse to walk beside him. He joked once on the way down. Something about us being quiet like we were hungover. No one answered. When we reached the parking area, the mood didn't get better. Both cars had been hit. Big scrapes down the doors, deep enough to expose the metal underneath. One of the mirrors hung loose on Blake's SUV. All 4 headlights, smashed. Leo said it had to be animals. Jamie said bears didn't attack glass like that. I noticed the scratches were too deliberate, too straight. No bite marks, no paw dents. Just parallel gouges, about 5 of them per door. Connor offered to go to the ranger station, said it was only 1.5 miles up the road. We didn't stop him. I think we were relieved to have him away from us. He said he'd be back in an hour. We waited. 2 hours passed. Then 3. By the 4th hour, We started hearing things again. Not voices this time, just footsteps. Same gravel crunching. Same pacing pattern around the site. When Leo went to the edge of the trees, he pointed out something weird. Tracks. Dozens of footprints. All boot prints. All matching Connor's size and tread. But they overlapped. Some were fresh, some older. The odd part was the directions. Multiple circles, diverging paths into the woods, like he'd been walking laps around the camp from different angles. One set of prints stretched too far between steps, like whoever made them had longer legs but wore Connor's boots. Jamie took a picture, but his phone died 2 minutes later. We were standing around trying to decide whether to walk to the station ourselves when a white truck pulled in. Park ranger. Said he'd gotten a radio call about a possible vehicle vandalism. We asked if Connor had sent him. He said no one had come by the station all morning. He helped us call for a tow, took our statements, didn't ask many questions. During the ride back to town, Jake, who had been dead silent for most of the trip, spoke up. I just saw him. We asked who. Connor, he said, pointing back down the road. By the tree line. He was just standing there. He said Connor didn't wave, didn't move. Just stared at the car with a strange grin. I turned and looked. There was nothing there. No figure. No movement. But the image stuck with me. Blake reported Connor missing 2 days later when he never texted back or showed up to class. His family contacted the police. I met with a detective and told him what I could. Left out the voices, the tracks, the sleeping bag. I gave them the time and location. I gave them what I thought they'd believe. I kept thinking, what if that thing wasn't Connor when it came out of the woods with firewood? What if it wasn't him when he volunteered to go to the ranger station? What if the real Connor never came back? Sometimes I look through social media for new accounts with his name, just to see. I never find anything. But sometimes I dream about the campsite, and in those dreams, I hear his voice again. It always calls from the trees, always says the same thing. I need help, but it never sounds quite right. When I was 42, I took my daughter Holly on what I thought would be a routine trail ride near our ranch in northern Wisconsin. We lived about a mile from the edge of the National Preserve, where we kept a couple of horses on our property. Mabel, my big gray mare, and Butter, the smaller Palomino my daughter rode. We both knew the woods around here well. My wife used to call it our second home, and most weekends we'd ride up the trails that bordered the reserve and then loop around to the southern ridge where the metal boundary gate marked the end of private land. That day was dry and hot, the kind of August heat that made the flies lazy and the horses slower than usual. We set out just before noon, following the gravel path through a patch of birch trees that eventually gave way to open scrub and low pines. Holly wore a blue windbreaker tied around her waist, and I had my old canvas rucksack with a water jug, some fruit, and the gate key. About 40 minutes in, we reached the clearing with the metal posts and the faded orange sign reading, "Federal Boundary, no motorized access beyond this point." The horses stopped before I pulled the reins. Mabel raised her head and shifted her weight, and Butter, who usually stayed calm, took a half step back and let out a short, low whinny. I looked toward the grove past the gate. About 50 yards out, in the middle of the oak line, something moved, slow and steady, just enough to catch the eye. At first, I thought it was a deer, maybe a buck. Then I figured maybe a coyote. They'd been seen up here more lately, though usually at dawn or dusk. But the movement wasn't right for that. I kept Butter's reins in one hand and stepped down from Mabel to unlatch the chain on the gate. That's when I saw the thing move again. And this time, it stepped into a patch of sunlight that broke through the canopy. It wasn't a coyote. The animal that emerged was bigger than any canine I'd ever seen in the wild. It was built like a wolf, but thicker, heavier, easily the size of a small horse. The fur was mottled gray with black along the back, and its chest was broad, almost barrel-like. But what really stuck out was the bright blue collar strapped around its thick neck, wide and clean, with a square black tag hanging from it. It looked brand new, like someone had put it on recently. I remember thinking how strange it was for something that looked that wild to be wearing a collar. The creature didn't hesitate. It moved through the trees like it belonged there, with a slow, heavy confidence. Mabel stomped, and Butter began to back up again, more agitated this time. Holly asked, "Dad, what is that?" And I just held my hand up for her to stay quiet. Instead of skirting around us like wild animals usually do, the thing came straight at us, but not toward me. It ignored me completely and locked its eyes on my daughter. I saw it lower its head slightly, ears pinned back, not in fear, but in focus, like it was calculating. It moved around Butter's right side, forcing the horse to spin. Holly held the reins tight, trying to control her. The animal didn't attack. It didn't growl or bark. It circled the horse deliberately, slowly, like a shepherd cutting one sheep from the flock. Not once did it glance in my direction. I shouted at it, waved my arms, picked up a rock and hurled it. It didn't even flinch. Butter reared slightly, almost unseating Holly, and I moved between them, holding out my arms. But the animal wasn't interested in me. It never broke eye contact with Holly. It kept positioning itself to get behind Butter, between the horse and me. The way it moved, it wasn't random. It was like a trained dog with a task. No hesitation, no confusion. I shouted again, louder, tried to make myself as large as possible. I even considered drawing my folding knife, though I doubted it would do much. Still nothing. I moved toward it, yelling now, stomping my boots, and it finally stopped circling. It stood still and stared. I got close enough to see the tag on its collar. Black plastic, maybe rubber, with white numbers stenciled on the side. The thing didn't growl or bare its teeth, but the stare was enough. It was like it didn't even see me as a threat. I took one more step, and it turned slowly and trotted back toward the grove, not in retreat, but like it had finished surveying something. Holly was crying quietly, still holding the reins, white-knuckled. Butter shook out her mane and finally stopped sidestepping. I didn't say anything right away. I just grabbed her horse's bridle and walked us both away from the gate. I didn't see where it went after that. I didn't follow it. I just wanted to get my daughter home. I instructed Holly to guide Butter in a tight turn so the wolf would line up behind the mare's hindquarters. "Just like we practiced," I said, loud and steady. Butter was trained to kick on cue, an old ranch trick I taught her when Holly first started riding solo. The moment the wolf inched closer, Holly gave the signal. Butter lashed out with both hind legs, connecting squarely with the creature's jaw. The crack echoed across the grove like a gunshot. I expected to see it drop or at least stumble. Instead, it absorbed the blow, stumbled once, then shook its head like it had been hit with a branch and resumed its stalking pattern, circling again with that same calculated movement. My hands were shaking as I pulled my phone from my rucksack. No signal. I stepped back, trying to gain elevation, hoping a few more feet might give me one bar. "Don't let her stop moving," I yelled. Butter was spinning in half circles now, Holly doing her best to keep her between the wolf and me. Then it lunged. Not with rage, but with the same cool control it had shown the whole time. It snapped at Butter's front legs, catching the flesh above the ankle. The horse reared up, letting out a full-bodied scream, nearly unseating Holly. I dropped the phone and ran forward, grabbing at the reins, dragging both of them away from the gate. The wolf followed. No barking, no sound. Just fast, smooth motion and eyes that stayed locked on Holly. I managed to get Holly down off her horse and pushed her ahead of me down the trail. The wolf stayed close behind, low and fast, closing the distance every time I looked away. The main road to the ranch was still half a mile off when we saw the barn roof. I opened the dog kennel gate and shoved Holly inside, locking it behind her. Mabel was still out there somewhere, but I didn't have time to go back. The wolf paced just outside the gate, staring at her through the wire. I sprinted to the house, busted the door open, and grabbed the .30-06 from behind the coat rack. By the time I made it back, the creature had backed into the woods, watching me from a distance, not afraid, but waiting. I aimed through the scope. It was just inside the tree line, only the head and shoulder visible. It blinked once and vanished behind the trunks without a sound. The next morning, I saddled Mabel early and we went back out to the boundary line. I brought the rifle, loaded and strapped across my back. I didn't let Holly come. When I reached the spot near the gate, the morning mist still clung to the brush. Nothing moved. But when I started to dismount, Holly's scream came from behind me. I spun around. She'd followed me against orders, standing frozen on the trail. The wolf stood 5 feet from her, partially hidden by a cluster of oaks. But this time, it didn't advance. It stared. Then, like it understood her voice, it turned and slunk away into the trees. We didn't ride home. We walked. I held the rifle in one hand, Holly's hand in the other. Over the next 3 weeks, I printed flyers with a description of the animal in that collar. Bright blue, rubbery, like a tracker or training tag. I called every vet in the county, posted online, even visited shelters. Nothing. No one missing a wolf dog. No breeders who dealt with hybrids. No training facilities who lost a large animal. The blue collar had no numbers, no ID, just a plain black square. Animal control came 2 days later. I led them out to the boundary gate, showed them where it had appeared, where the chase began. The lead officer crouched to examine the dirt. "That's not right," he said, tracing the prints with a gloved finger. The paw prints were long and narrow, but the spacing between them was wide, too wide. Whatever made them had a stride close to a bear, but the print shape was all wrong. Deep imprints, as if it carried more weight than its size should allow. They took casts, photos, notes, promised to escalate it to the DNR. I never heard back. We stopped using that trail, not out of fear exactly, more like respect. The kind you give something you can't explain. The thing never crossed our fence line again. But within the next month, we heard from neighbors to the west and south. 2 different families described something similar. Big canine, silent, focused. One family said it circled their car when they stopped at the edge of the tree line. Another said their goats were slaughtered one night. No blood trail, just clean bites to the neck. Nobody could confirm if it was the same animal, but the descriptions matched, right down to the collar. Holly doesn't ride out there anymore. Neither do I. She still talks about it sometimes. Not in full sentences, but in pieces. Like she's still trying to process what happened. She tells me about the eyes, how they didn't blink, didn't waver. How they watched her, not like prey, but like something else. I tell her it's over, that it's gone, but I can't say I believe it. Sometimes, late at night, Our dogs will bark in the direction of the tree line and refuse to stop. I keep the rifle next to the bed now. I've come to believe that not everything wearing a collar is a pet, and not everything walking on four legs belongs to the wild. Some things are put here for other reasons, reasons we don't understand. The blue collar was never a mistake. It was a mask, and it almost worked. So when I was 19 and delivering Chinese food around New Jersey's suburbs, I got a call that still makes my hands shake. It was around 11:30 p.m. on a Saturday, just when things usually start winding down for the night. I was sitting behind the counter thumbing through my phone when the landline rang. The voice on the other end was distorted, like someone speaking through a blown-out speaker. It wasn't just muffled, it crackled like the person was either using some cheap headset or purposely messing with the audio. They ordered 2 basic entrees, came out to $23 even, and gave an address, 2849 Maple Street. Late-night orders were nothing unusual for that area. People always seemed to crave sesame chicken and lo mein around midnight. I jotted down the address without thinking much about it. What did throw me off was the way the caller kept pausing. After every question, white rice or fried chopsticks or fork, there was this long silence. Not like they didn't hear me. More like they were carefully picking their words, waiting just long enough to make it uncomfortable. When I asked for the name for the order, there was an especially long pause. Then they just said, "No name. Just deliver it." The line clicked before I could ask anything else. I felt weird when I hung up, like I had just talked to someone who wasn't used to being on the phone, or someone pretending not to be themselves. But I needed the tip. Gas was expensive, and tips were the only reason the job made sense. I packed the order, grabbed my keys, and headed out. Maple Street wasn't far, 10 minutes tops. I'd been on that route more times than I could count. It was one of those long, quiet suburban roads where each house had a perfectly trimmed lawn and a black mailbox out front. But when I got there, something didn't make sense. House 2847 was on the corner. 2851 was 2 driveways down. There was no 2849. Just an empty lot between them, overgrown with yellow weeds and thick brush. A rusted chain-link fence lined the front, but the gate was wide open. I pulled my car to the curb, double-checked the receipt. 2849 Maple Street. It was definitely what they said. I pulled out my phone to call the number back. No answer. Just a low humming sound, not a busy signal or voicemail. Just a deep, bassy hum that made the speaker vibrate. I hung up, tried again. Same thing, only louder this time. On the 3rd attempt, it got loud enough that I yanked the phone away from my ear. I figured maybe it was a prank, some bored teenager messing around. I put the car in park, left the engine running, and stepped out to take a closer look at the lot. That's when the smell hit me. Not like garbage. Not like something dead either. It was something worse. Like old fish left in the sun mixed with the sour stench of sewage. It made my eyes burn instantly. I pulled my sleeve up over my nose and kept walking toward the gate. There were tire tracks in the dirt, like a car had pulled in recently. They led all the way to the back where the lot ended in a broken line of trees. Nothing else. No shed. No house foundation. Just dirt and weeds and shadows. I turned back to my car. That's when I saw the figure. They were standing at the far end of the lot, just under the dim light of a cracked street lamp that flickered every few seconds. I hadn't noticed them when I got out. The person was tall, wearing a dirty, oversized jacket that hung almost to their knees. The sleeves were soaked in something dark. Their pants were torn at the knees, bare feet standing on the gravel and dead leaves. Their arms hung limp at their sides, and their head was tilted too far to the left, like their neck couldn't hold it straight. From where I was, maybe 50 feet away, I couldn't see much detail. But I could tell something was off about their face. It wasn't just dirty. It looked warped, like their features were twisted or smeared. I stood frozen, the bag of food still in my hand. They didn't move. I cleared my throat. "You order food?" I asked, voice low. They didn't respond. Just stood there under that dying light, head still tilted, watching. Something about the way they didn't answer made me back up a step. I looked around. Every other house on the street was dark. No porch lights, no cars and driveways. It was like the whole block had emptied out, and I hadn't noticed until then. I took another step backward, toward my car. The figure shifted. Not a step, not a turn, just a slight movement of their right arm, like a twitch or spasm. But it was enough. I turned, dropped the food bag, and walked quickly back to my car. Not running, not yet. Just fast enough to feel the gravel crunching under my sneakers. I opened the driver's side door and got in. Locked it. Checked the rearview mirror. The figure was gone. I didn't hear any footsteps. No branches snapping. Nothing. Just gone. I turned the engine off. Sat there listening. The only sound was the quiet tick of the cooling engine and that faint humming still coming from my phone in the passenger seat. I picked it up again and checked the call log. The number was still there. No name, just 11 digits. I looked back toward the lot. Still empty. I was about to put the car in drive when I saw something move again. This time closer, just outside the glow of my headlights, right behind the chain link fence. A glint of something metallic near the ground, then gone. That was enough. I hit the gas and drove straight back to the restaurant, barely stopping at signs. I told my manager the guy never showed and left the food on the porch. I didn't mention the figure. I didn't mention the smell or the humming. I just said the address was wrong. I went home and lay awake until morning, waiting for a knock that never came. As I approached with the order, I realized the figure's eyes were completely black, like deep holes in their skull. Not just shadowed or dilated, completely black, like the sockets had been burned out and filled with ink. I slowed down and stopped about 10 feet away, keeping the food bag clutched tight in my hand. "You ordered Chinese?" I asked. No answer. The head twitched once to the left, then to the right. Like a machine trying to reset. Its whole body stood too still, too stiff, and its chin jerked in short, delayed nods, but there was no rhythm to the movement, just broken patterns. I repeated myself, louder. "You placed the order?" Nothing. It didn't move. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the receipt, just trying to anchor myself in reality. The phone barely rang once before I heard it. 30 feet behind me, in the bushes. A muffled ringtone, the exact same one. I turned my head slowly and stared into the darkness behind me. That's when the figure in front of me moved. It opened its mouth, and for the first few seconds, no sound came out. Its lips formed slow, wrong shapes. Then, seconds later, that same distorted voice from the original phone call came echoing out, not synced with its mouth. "Leave the food, on the ground, and step back," it said, flat and broken, like a recording that had been played too many times. My whole body locked up. Every instinct told me to throw the bag and run, but I couldn't even blink. Then the thing moved again. Not a walk, not even a run. Just stuttering, fast lunges, covering more space with each step than its limbs should have allowed. It wasn't running, but it was closing the distance faster than any person should. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and dropped the bag between us without meaning to. My foot caught the curb, and I nearly fell, catching myself on a street sign just in time. I stayed frozen there while the figure crouched in front of the food. Its fingers unfolded out of the sleeves, pale and thin, but way too long. They curled around the plastic bag like they had extra joints, and the fingernails were cracked, thick, and black at the edges. Dark crusted gunk flaked off as it moved. I could smell it, metallic and rotten and sharp like chemicals. It slowly reached into a front pocket and pulled out a wad of bills, some of them torn, all of them soaked in a shiny black liquid that clung to the creases like syrup. It extended the money toward me. I didn't want to touch it, but my hand moved on its own. I grabbed the edge of the bills, trying not to let the slime drip onto my skin, but it did anyway. My fingers burned where it touched, like I dipped them in bleach and something else. It didn't even acknowledge the exchange, just turned away, melting into the dark space between the houses like a shadow collapsing in on itself. I didn't wait. I turned and sprinted to my car, yanked open the door, and slammed it shut. I locked it twice before starting the engine. I was shaking so bad I dropped my keys once trying to insert them. The streetlight above flickered and buzzed like it was about to pop. I got the engine going and threw the car into gear, but I didn't hit the gas right away. Something told me to check my mirrors. In the rear view, there was nothing. I checked both sides. The figure was gone. The sidewalk was empty. I pulled away slow, not looking back again until I hit the end of the street. My hands stung and my throat was dry. I didn't even feel the slime on my fingers anymore, but the smell was still there, stuck in my nose. I didn't know where to go, only that I needed to get as far away from that house, or lot, or whatever it was, as I could. I hit the first red light maybe 5 minutes later. No cars around. Dead quiet. I was gripping the wheel tight, trying to remember how to breathe. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, on the passenger side window, its face, pressed against the glass. Black eyes, wide and empty, staring through me. Mouth moving slow again, words forming silently. My whole body went rigid. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Just stared back at it until my foot finally smashed the gas pedal to the floor. The tires squealed and I shot through the red light. Didn't care if someone was coming. Didn't care about anything except getting away. I didn't stop until I hit the restaurant parking lot. I parked crooked, jumped out, and ran inside. The manager looked up from the counter and asked what the hell happened to me, but I pushed past him into the back, grabbed the work phone, and checked the call log. 18 missed calls, all from the same number. Same distorted voice on the voicemail, over and over. "Where's my food?" Then again, same words. "Where's my food?" Like a broken loop that had never stopped playing. I tossed the phone on the counter and went outside to get air, but I already knew what I had to do. I didn't go back in. I didn't say goodbye. I got in my car and drove home, hands still trembling. Next morning, when I went out to the driveway, I noticed something on the driver's side door. Sticky handprints, black smears like tar, streaked down the metal, and caught in the rubber of the handle, a strip of fabric, thin, stained, and shredded, like it had been ripped off by something not fully human. I left the car unlocked and walked back inside. Called the owner of the restaurant, told him I quit. Didn't give a reason. Some customers don't want food. Some just want to know that you'll come when they call. Some want to be sure you'll show up even when you shouldn't. And some customers aren't human. And that thing knew exactly where to find me. It happened last winter when I was 25 and working my first season as a Forest Service trainee in northern Montana. I'd just finished the required classroom training in Missoula and had been assigned to a remote outpost station near the Canadian border. It was mostly fire watch duties and boundary patrols, with the occasional job assisting wildlife officers. I didn't mind the isolation. It gave me time to get used to the rhythm of the land and to test out the new rifle I'd bought right before the season started. I wasn't a great shot, but I'd been practicing. The county was offering a wolf bounty program, and I figured if I got lucky, I could make a little side money. Our ranger station was an old wooden structure about the size of a cabin, with 2 bunks, a wood stove, and a radio shack tacked on the back. We had a generator that worked most of the time, and enough rations to last a few weeks if the roads got snowed in. I'd been paired with another trainee, a guy named Chris, but he was off helping with a prescribed burn about 20 miles south that week, so I had the station to myself. That morning, I'd prepped 2 bait stations just west of the ridge and a third closer to the east fence line. I used scraps from the supply freezer and scent markers to attract anything in the area. It was quiet work, cold, repetitive, and slow. By late afternoon, I was making my way back to the station, snow crunching under my boots and the trees dead silent in that eerie winter way. I had just finished checking the last bait trap near a frozen creek when I saw something off in the distance, about 200 yards uphill. It was a figure, standing perfectly still at the edge of a clearing, partly hidden behind a line of pines. I stopped walking, raised my hand and waved. No response. Just this shape standing there like it was waiting for something. I didn't have binoculars on me, so I stared as hard as I could, trying to make out what it was. Maybe another hunter, I thought. Someone checking his own bait lines. But he didn't wave back, didn't move at all. Just turned slowly and disappeared behind the trees. It was getting late, and I didn't want to be out in the dark. The sun was already halfway down the ridge, and the temperature was dropping fast. I zipped up my jacket and started back toward the station. The sky had gone that weird purplish blue, the kind that tricks your eyes into thinking it's lighter than it really is. That's when I heard it, the first cry for help. It echoed clear and sharp across the frozen landscape, somewhere behind me, back toward the area near the creek. I stopped in my tracks and turned around. Another cry, more strained this time. Definitely human. No question about it. It wasn't a wolf or a cougar or anything like that. It was a man yelling for help. And he sounded close. I fumbled with my gloves and started the snowmobile I'd parked about 50 yards away under a grove of pine. The engine roared to life, and I steered in the direction of the sound, kicking up snow in the narrow space between the trees. My headlamp cut a narrow beam ahead, bouncing over drifts and fallen branches. I kept the rifle strapped to my back and followed a set of tracks that looked fresh. Boot prints, wide gait, leading away from the creek and angling northeast. It was hard to tell exactly where they were headed, but I kept going, sweeping my light through the trees. Every few minutes, another shout rang out, always in perfect English, always a bit farther off. I pushed the snowmobile harder, riding over a small embankment and weaving around a dead spruce. My face was stinging from the wind. I couldn't feel my nose. I yelled back into the trees, "Hello? I'm with the Forest Service." "Keep yelling." But the reply was just another cry for help, this one even more panicked. I followed the boot prints deeper into the trees, my headlamp flickering slightly as the terrain began to slope. Whoever it was, they were either moving fast or being moved. I stopped for a moment and shut off the engine. Just silence. My breath came out in clouds and froze instantly on my scarf. Then, another cry. This time it was just over a rise ahead of me. "Please, help me." closer than before. Sounded like they were maybe 50 yards out. I started the engine again and pushed forward. The snowmobile slid a little sideways going up the slope, but I kept it steady, navigating around a few stumps and low branches. I crested the ridge and aimed my headlight into the woods ahead. The beam caught nothing at first, just trees, snow, brush. Then something moved. A shape darted behind a thick pine to the left, just barely in the corner of my light. I turned the handlebars and edged forward, squinting into the dark. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. No answer. Just the soft thump of snow falling from an overhead branch. Then came the sound of crunching footsteps, fast, heavy, and not far off. I turned the light in that direction and saw the edge of a jacket disappear behind another tree, maybe 20 feet ahead. Whoever it was, they were running. I pulled the snowmobile forward, then killed the engine again. Jumped off and unstrapped my rifle. My boots sank into the snow up to my shins as I moved forward, flashlight in one hand, rifle in the other. "Stop moving," I shouted. "I'm here to help." No reply, but the footsteps had stopped too. I scanned the trees ahead, every shape looking too still, too perfect. I stepped carefully, crunch by crunch, toward the last place I saw the movement. That's when I found the boot prints again, veering sharply to the right, and beside them, another set of tracks, bare feet, much smaller. I stared at them for a long moment before kneeling down, brushing away the loose snow. They were fresh. No more than a few minutes old. And whoever left them wasn't wearing shoes. At a sharp turn in the trail, something screamed, "Save me," directly in front of my snowmobile. It was so sudden and close, I barely had time to react. I swerved hard to avoid hitting what looked like a crouched figure in the snow. The left ski clipped a buried rock, and the whole machine flipped sideways. The impact slammed my ribs into the frozen ground and pinned my left leg under the weight of the chassis. I lay there gasping, my back soaked from melting snow and ice stabbing into every joint. The headlamp of the snowmobile flickered, still aimed toward the trail. For a second, nothing moved. Then I heard it. Branches cracking, snow shifting, something big coming through the trees. I turned my head slowly. A shadow was moving toward me. It wasn't walking. It was gliding, like the snow wasn't there. My arms fumbled with the wreckage, trying to find the rifle still strapped somewhere on the back panel. My gloves were wet, fingers numb. I could barely get any grip. When the thing stepped into the light, I froze. It stood on two legs, but was hunched, at least 9 feet tall, covered in thick matted fur that clung in clumps to its limbs and chest. The worst part wasn't the size. It was the face, pale, almost white, like bone. No nose, no lips, just dark sunken pits where the eyes should have been. When it tilted its head, I saw steam rising from its breathless mouth. It reached out and grabbed my throat. Its hand was huge, long fingers pressed against my skin like dry ice. I screamed from pure shock and pain. Then it opened its mouth and screamed back. But not just a noise. It used my exact voice. The same pitch, same breath pattern. It was like listening to myself echo through a tunnel. I got one hand loose and yanked the rifle from the snowmobile's twisted frame. I didn't aim. I just pointed it at the thing's chest and fired 3 times. Muzzle flashes lit the trees. The shots went straight into its ribs, but it didn't fall. It barely flinched. Its other hand grabbed the side of my head and began slamming me against the ground, again and again. My helmet cracked. I could hear my own grunts and groans as the ice tore into my scalp. but I wasn't blacking out. Somehow, I got my knife free and jabbed at whatever part of its arm I could reach. I don't think it bled. I don't know what it did. But it hissed. An awful sound that mixed animal growls with chopped up human words. It was like listening to someone talk through broken teeth. Then a roar cut through the woods, another snowmobile, approaching fast. I turned my head just enough to see headlights bouncing through the dark. The creature didn't move. It kept its grip on me until the snowmobile was almost on top of us. Then came a shotgun blast. The buckshot hit it dead in the shoulder. Another shot, louder this time, caught its side. It let go of me and staggered backward, then spun and sprinted into the trees, crashing through the undergrowth without sound. Jake jumped off the snowmobile, shotgun still raised, shouting my name. He knelt beside me, eyes wide, mouth open like he couldn't believe what he saw. "Don't move," he said, pressing his glove to the side of my head. "You're bleeding bad." He got me out from under the wreck with a few hard pulls and wrapped my arm over his shoulder. We climbed onto his snowmobile and drove back to the ranger station, the wind biting through every layer I had. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole ride back. Jake didn't speak until we were inside and the door was bolted. He sat me down, checked the gash on my forehead and said, "That was an aggressive grizzly, probably protecting cubs." I didn't answer. I just stared at the blood on his gloves. Jake filed his report the next morning. Officially, it was a bear encounter. Standard seasonal behavior. Aggressive, but not unusual. The shotgun shells were logged. The broken snowmobile was hauled in by a sled team 2 days later. Nothing was said about the voice, or the face, or the way it mimicked me. At the clinic in Kalispell, the doctor treated my concussion and fractured rib. But what he kept circling back to was why I kept insisting it wasn't a bear. When I told him bears don't speak English, he wrote something down in my chart and changed the subject. I spent 3 weeks off duty, sleeping with the lights on and waking up to phantom footsteps outside the cabin. I didn't talk about it again, not even to Jake. When I returned, the snow had started melting. The patrol areas changed, but word had already gotten around. One of the rangers mentioned hearing someone yelling for help around the northern perimeter. He said it sounded like a teenager. Another swore he heard a little girl crying in perfect, clear English. But no tracks, no body, nothing found. None of them investigated. Everyone had some excuse. Too far out. Poor radio signal. Ice still unstable. But I knew the real reason. We all did. Something lives out there. Deep in the woods, far from roads, far from help. It doesn't stalk like a predator. It doesn't growl like an animal. It doesn't even need to hide. All it needs to do is sound like us.